welcome to my London and Paris trip report. I'll be finishing things up on my trip to London, and we'll get right back into all things to do right here in Southern California. For more on the journey to Europe, the first day in London, or to catch up, check out my previous episode of the One Day in SoCal podcast, episode 28. After an exhausting overnight plane ride across the Atlantic, I finally got some much-needed sleep. In the morning, I was ready for my week-long adventure in London and Paris. The Doubletree by Hilton, Tower Hill, has several restaurants on property. This includes 3 in-house dining areas with Hilton employees and 2 third-party restaurants operated by separate companies. For Hilton, there is the Hilton Executive Lounge, which offers free breakfast to Hilton Diamond members in a quiet airport lounge-style setting. Like most Hilton properties, you can also gain access to the special lounge if you upgrade or get upgraded to a suite or better accommodations. The key here, though, is to weigh whether or not saving money by free breakfast is worth the upgraded suite price per night. If you are a Hilton Gold member or above, it's not. More on that in a second. Also at this location, there's a lobby bar called Number 7 that offers hard and soft drinks, light snacks, and bar bites, as well as afternoon tea service. Finally, there's the City Cafe, which is a breakfast buffet-style sit-down restaurant that is free to Hilton Gold and Diamond members and costs extra for other guests. The 2 third-party restaurants on site are Natural Kitchen and Savage Garden. Natural Kitchen is more of a traditional British cuisine restaurant on the first floor, while Savage Garden is a rooftop bar with dining and amazing views of the surrounding city, including the Tower of London about 3 blocks over. Now, when I checked in, I received no instructions on how breakfast worked at this hotel. Hilton traditionally offers a $15 credit for dining on property per day for some of its properties, while offering free breakfast at others. So, first thing in the morning, I went in search of where to use that. I headed down to the first floor and stumbled into Natural Kitchen, unsure where the City Cafe was. I waited for several minutes near the check-in booth, and finally somebody noticed me, or got tired of me standing there, and seated me at a table. I noticed there was a lot of London businessmen in suits and ties having breakfast and preparing for a day at the office, which made sense as the skyscrapers of downtown London's business district were literally a few blocks away. In fact, that was the main view from my window in my room, which faced north, downtown London. By contrast to all the businessmen, I felt out of place in my shorts, Skechers, polo shirt, and glaringly obvious tourist GoPro backpack. A menu was finally dropped off, and I sat there for at least 20 minutes waiting for service. With 3 big things planned for today, my time is valuable, and with no service after 20 minutes, I simply got up and walked out. Exploring the hotel a little more, I finally found City Cafe. As it turns out, my Hilton Gold status was enough to get me a free all I could care to eat buffet breakfast each and every single morning at this location. And this was not some mediocre continental or Hampton waffle breakfast either. This was probably, and I'm not exaggerating here, the best breakfast buffet I have ever had. And I got the opportunity to enjoy it free nearly each and every single morning on my trip. City Cafe offers a full English breakfast buffet with table service. That's included. You are seated by waitstaff and offered tea or coffee. Then they offer you your own coffee or tea set, complete with a teapot or coffee kettle pot, respectively. The variety here was enough to keep me coming back every single morning. A traditional English breakfast, traditionally, as there are variations and no exact standards, consists of fried egg, sausage, bacon, grilled tomato, beans, and black pudding. Black pudding not being what you think it is. The full English breakfast is also accompanied by tea, coffee, and toast. All that was here, buffet style, along with a charcuterie board, baguette bread station, toast station, juice station, and pastries. The buffet was excellent, akin to a 3-star restaurant, and met my needs every single morning. Again, so much so that I didn't venture out for breakfast anywhere else. I really can't understate it. In fact, I stuffed myself each morning on the breakfast to the point that I often skipped lunch and did not have to eat until either the late afternoon or dinner. The buffet here saved me quite a bit of money overall, almost like skipping a meal and a half each day of the trip, which can really add up, especially in an expensive city like London. So after my first hearty English breakfast, I headed for the Tower of London, which was about 3 blocks away. Walking the streets of London was something out of a history book, as you might imagine. Modern and historical clash with each other for real estate on the streets. It's true a majority of London was incinerated in the Great Fire of 1666. But still, there are medieval buildings, narrow lanes and alleyways, surviving churches dating back nearly 1,000 years, and of course the major historical buildings such as the Tower of London. The truly ancient buildings and relics, such as Roman ruins, lie underground and often underneath modern buildings where they are usually preserved as they are found with each new construction project in the city. There's some exceptions to that. There's some Roman ruins that are above ground, but in general, it's stuff like this is usually found underground when they start a new building or they tear down a building and build another one. In fact, it's basically mandatory to have archaeologists on hand when starting construction on new buildings, as with thousands of years of history right here, it's nearly impossible not to dig up historical artifacts. It is a good choice to book a hotel near tourist areas like the Tower of London if visiting on vacation or holiday. But even more important is to book near a London Underground station. And when comparing and contrasting prices as well as distance, it's going to be more expensive, obviously, to book a hotel in the city center, but it's going to save you so much time, and the convenience factor, just can't be understated. And you're on vacation, spend a little, live a little, especially on a once-in-a-lifetime trip like this. Back to Tower of London. The Tower of London hardly requires an introduction. It's easily London's most famous attraction, and for good reason. The history here is incredible, to put it ever so lightly. The tower was only about 3 blocks from the hotel and an easy stroll. Like many things in London, it is one of those things we've all seen and heard of. The tower stands out as one of the most important historical and cultural locations in the entire city, if not the entire nation of the United Kingdom. Movies and television shows featuring daring robberies of the crown jewels, late-night documentaries, or Halloween specials show details of haunting tales with ghosts like the Headless Anne Boleyn. Dramas feature brutal torture and unjust arrests and executions. Upon having my ticket scanned and entering from the west side, I proceeded through Byward Tower and was greeted by a shop offering audio guides. I took one, but I found that I didn't use it very much. What I wanted to do on my visit was take a Beefeater guided tour, but pressed for time, I ended up skipping this, unfortunately. Instead, I proceeded straight to Traitors Gate. Traitors Gate is visible from both outside and inside the Tower of London. Still, I sat here and I pondered, as many folks probably have over the centuries, what it must have been like to enter through this gate, knowing very well in the back of your mind that you probably weren't coming back out alive. How terrifying it is that so few had so much power over so many, including the power of life or death. How far England has come, the lessons learned that brought the United States, and how much further we realistically have to go as a world. There are still nations trapped in dictatorships like North Korea, and nations that bring on the facade of democracy like China and Russia. But the absolute fear and terror of being brought to the tower as a political prisoner, to be interrogated or executed, must have been a terror we can't even imagine today. Traitors Gate also has direct water access from the Thames River, meaning most people entering through Traitors Gate would have been brought in by boat or raft. Further down the path from Traitors Gate is a self-guided walkthrough called the Medieval Palace. This is the beginning of several entrances to the ramparts and walls surrounding the Tower of London. The total walk along the walls and on the many towers at several points along the wall will take you about a third of the way around the entire property, and at least a good 2 hours if you are actually stopping to spend time to read and enjoy the incredible history you are walking over. The Tower of London has been at its current location for nearly 1,000 years. Although more has been added to it over the centuries, each part of the Tower of London tells a different story. And sometimes the same story. The medieval tower section shows you what the palace would have looked like around 1270 when King Edward I made it his personal palace for a time. Essentially, those scenes from Braveheart where the dreaded Longshanks was plotting in the castle are meant to represent King Edward I's time in the tower. The most impressive part of this section is that the tower is a recreation of Edward I's bedroom. Small side note, just in case you didn't know, there are in fact real articles on display here from all over the centuries, but King Edward I's bedroom is a largely recreation of what his bedroom looked like. Nonetheless, on the fireplace are still black scorch marks from centuries past, and one could only possibly fathom what you would learn if the walls really could talk. King Edward the Longshanks was not the a-hole Braveheart portrayed him to be. I'm not saying there weren't times when he wasn't a jerk, but living in the cutthroat Middle Ages where societal collapse is just one plot away, you almost had to be to survive when you think about it. So honestly, for all of Edward I's faults, I can't be that annoyed. Naturally, the same goes for William Wallace. Moving along in a counterclockwise fashion along the walls and keeps of the Tower of London, the next section we reach is King Henry III's Praying Chapel. What will stop you dead in your tracks is how incredible the nearly floor-to-ceiling stained glass window is. Impeccably preserved and a survivor of battles, riots, and bombing campaigns, including the Blitzkrieg. This stained glass window honestly had me standing in awe for several minutes while I drank in the color and airiness of the room. It felt like I was in a Starburst commercial, or maybe Fruipyland from Rick and Morty. Photos will be on the website section of the website, by the way, onedayinsocal.com. Along the wall and into the next tower is the infamous Bloody Tower. This tower was primarily used to imprison and interrogate people, and it's hard to imagine how much literal blood flowed in this section of the property. The screams don't echo along the walls anymore, but what does stand the test of time for all to see is the markings on the wall by the tower's many prisoners, both guilty and innocent. Again, how some of these scribbles on the wall, now protected by glass, survived this long without being repaired or plastered over is truly an amazing thought to think about. I was in as much awe of this personally as when I first saw Native American art on rocks in Joshua Tree and Arches National Park in California and Utah, respectively. Today, we would probably call something like this graffiti, but back in the day, it was art. Or even more somber, someone's last message during their final days and hours on Earth. And it's still here for you to read today. There are names, religious messages, final thoughts, and many of these folks would have been forgotten to history if they didn't possess the strong desire to record on the wall in the Bloody Tower. It stands as a testament to how powerful religion was to these folks as well. One such message on the wall of the tower state, "The more affliction we endure for Christ in this world, the more glory we shall get with Christ in the world to come." This inscription in Latin was carved above the chimney breast in the Beauchamp Tower by Philip Howard, Earl of Arundel, in 1587. His father was executed in 1572 for treason, and in 1585, Howard was arrested and charged with being a Catholic, spending the rest of his life at the tower where he died in 1595. A man named Hugh Draper, an innkeeper, ended up in the tower because he was accused of sorcery. Although he pleaded not guilty, he ended up carving a highly intricate zodiac wheel on the wall. Below it, he signed his name. Hugh Draper of Bristow made this spear the 30th day of May, 1561. What's most telling about this is the fact that it was done low to the ground, where someone might be sitting instead of standing, giving a hint to what kind of condition Mr. Draper would have been in while drawing this art. One of the more famous displays on the wall was created by Ambrose Rookwood, a member of the Gunpowder Plot of 1607. Think Guy Fawkes and all those dumb masks that 30-year-olds wear in their mom's basement pretending to be activists. The real activist was arrested on 8th November 1606 and taken from the tower on the 27th of January 1607 to Westminster Hall, where he pleaded guilty. On the 30th of January, he was tied to a hurdle and dragged by horse from the tower to Westminster before being hung, drawn, and quartered with his fellow conspirators. The entire walk around the wall took me about 2 hours, mostly because I was analyzing every inch of the space, being the amateur historian I consider myself to be. But I still had other stops today, so I finished up my self-guided tour. One thing I immediately noticed was that I had barely used the audio guide that I had picked up immediately after entering the tower. This would be a theme for the rest of my visit to London and Paris. I would always get the audio guide, but I would find myself preferring to read the signs as opposed to spending time listening. Part of the reason behind this is that I had packed so much into my week-long trip to Europe each day that I felt a little rushed, I guess, at each attraction. I did my best to strike a balance as best as I could between the most important things I wanted to see and the things I was willing to sacrifice, ultimately for budget, time, and money. Because if I could spend a month in London instead, I certainly would have. There are two things on my list I wanted to see before I left the Tower of London, however. The Crown Jewels and the White Tower. The Crown Jewels tour takes you about 20 minutes max and features a moving walkway, which takes you by several pieces of royal jewelry, having been protected at the tower for centuries. The tower is more than just a tourist attraction. It's an active British Army post, and one of the core missions of the Tower of London is, in fact, to protect the Crown Jewels. Just like everything else of the tower, admittance into the Crown Jewels exhibit is free, but photography and videography is strictly off limits. For the most part, being a foreigner in these lands, I respected the rules and did not photograph or take any video where I wasn't permitted to do so. There was one exception to this rule, and we're going to get to that much later down the line here. So I don't know what the statute of limitations are in the UK, but hopefully I won't have Scotland Yard knocking on my door in the near future. So anyways, as the coronation of King Charles III was a few days away, several of the jewels, including the royal crown, were missing so that they could be properly sized and prepared for the new monarch. In any case, most of the current crown jewels only go back as far as the 1600s. This is because the original crown jewels were seized by Oliver Cromwell's faction after the execution of King Charles I and had been melted down. This alone is reason enough for me to despise Oliver Cromwell. Although I completely understand his position and situation during the English Civil War, it's likely I would have sided with him if I was born in that era as well. But even during Cromwell's time, the crown jewels were an ancient national treasure. Anyways, there are a few fortunate exceptions that were saved fortunately. The oldest among these treasures is the Coronation spoon, which dates back to the 12th century. The centerpiece of the crown jewels is the crown itself, called St. Edward's Crown, which was made for King Charles II in 1689, and now fitted for King Charles III here in 2023. Nonetheless, I don't care who you are, a piece of inch-wide security glass standing between you and an invaluable and irreplaceable centuries-old national treasure will put anyone in awe. After leaving the Crown Jewels, I headed for the White Tower. The White Tower is the oldest building at the Tower of London. It's the keep that stands directly in the middle of the grounds and was first built in 1080, shortly after William the Conqueror took over England. The Normans, of which William the Conqueror was one, are considered an extinct race by historians today, having folded into what would become the English. But a precious few of their unique architecture still survives today, and much of that can be found inside the White Tower. In fact, one of the most impressive displays of Norman architecture at the White Tower is St. John's Chapel. I mean, if you've never stood in a Norman chapel from the year 1080, you'd be forgiven, but you don't know what you're missing. It's clear the pride and respect the Normans and later the English had for their chapels and cathedrals and religion. And it wasn't lost on me how important power players from history, both kings and prisoners, came here to pray to God for forgiveness, victory in battle, or mercy. The tower also held an impressive armory of weapons, shields, and armor, and many of those that have been worn by kings and knights are preserved here in near mint condition, as they would have looked on the day of important battles in English history. One last piece of history at the White Tower that I found very interesting was the Norman bathroom. On one of the floors, a pit toilet is preserved that leads straight down the side of the tower. When thinking of historical buildings or structures, the history books often leave out that ever-present human need to defecate. I was pleased to see Norman kings enjoyed their privacy as well, as after entering the door, you went down a small alleyway. You went down a small hallway and presented with a seat and a hole in which to drop a literal stink bomb below. So, as often happens when I visit places on trips, I rarely budget enough time and often find myself running behind schedule. This was the case for the British Museum, my next stop on day 2 of my trip to London. In the back of my mind, I knew I'd be cutting my time at the British Museum down to about 3 hours, but I accepted that possible disappointment to spend more time exploring the Tower of London. And on that note, the fact is, you can't properly get through the British Museum even if you had 2 days as a visitor. And you'd probably need a week if you are a genuine history buff or archaeologist. The British Museum is quite simply overwhelming with the amount of historical artifacts they have on display here. I was here for about 3.5 hours and I got to see a small fraction of the collection. Because I knew my time would be somewhat limited, I focused on 2 collections I personally wanted to see the most: Egypt and Rome. Even in the 3.5 hours I had just in these 3 sections, I also have found some time for Greece. I was not able to get through it all, and I certainly didn't have enough time to read everything. The museum makes an impression almost immediately upon entering with its glass roof. The glass roof covers about 2 acres of space with 3,212 panes of glass, and no 2 are the exact same. Essentially, this used to be an outdoor courtyard surrounded by 4 buildings on all sides. Now it's enclosed and has a building in the middle that features a restaurant and a very large bookstore. But when I got here, I decided to grab a quick bite at a grab-and-go dining area called the Court Cafe. There is also the Great Court Restaurant for food service dining experience, as well as a coffee shop and pizzeria here for kids. With a late lunch taken care of, I headed for the Egyptian exhibit. The very first thing you're going to see when you enter the Egyptian exhibit, loud and proud, front and center, is the one and only Rosetta Stone. When most people think Rosetta Stone, they think of the language company that helps millions learn a new language. Truth is, however, the Rosetta Stone is a real object. The Rosetta Stone is a large stone slab that is inscribed with a decree issued in Memphis, Egypt, in 196 BC during the reign of Ptolemy V. That alone, as a surviving piece, is incredible, but what sets this apart as one of the most important pieces in the museum's collection is the fact that it is inscribed identically in 3 languages: Ancient Egyptian, Demotic Script, and Ancient Greek. Up until its discovery in 1799, the translation of Ancient Egyptian to modern languages had been lost. All those well-preserved pyramids, tombs, and temples in Egypt with the endless amounts of writing of history and stories written all over them were nothing more than random scribbles of nonsense. But because we knew how to speak Greek, Ancient Egyptian could finally be translated. The stone often has a crowd of people around it, marveling, just like me. It's several feet tall and about 3 feet wide and covered completely on all sides by glass. So you can walk all around it and view it up close. Moving on through the Egyptian collection, the next piece that caught my eye was a statue of Ramses II. Any Bible-reading Christians out there, or even film fans of such great works such as The Prince of Egypt or The 10 Commandments, know that Ramses II was the pharaoh that battled God and by extension Moses during and at the conclusion of the Israelites' departure from slavery in Egypt to the Promised Land in Exodus. So you'll find it to your surprise that the closest image you get to Ramses II himself is this incredibly well-preserved giant statue. The statue is very large and Ramses beams down at you with a commanding presence, almost as if deciding your fate. There are several actual mummies here in the Egyptian collection to view as well. Last time I actually got to see a mummy was probably in the early 90s, and I remember it vividly during a school field trip to the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, where I believe an Egyptian collection was on tour. Also here were mummified remains of cats enclosed in cat-shaped sarcophagus. The museum collection of Greek and Roman antiquities isn't to be missed either. Tons of statues, head busts, ancient examples of Roman plumbing, and even a preserved square fountain with much of its tile work intact. Previously visiting the Getty Villa near Malibu, California, one fun thing I've always enjoyed out of any good Roman collection is reading the translation of the Roman tombstones. In doing so, you'll find Romans really were not that different from you and I, just from a different world. One of my favorite all-time tombstones is for a pet dog made by one Roman that reads, "I am in tears while carrying you to your final resting place, as much as I rejoiced when bringing you home with my own hands 15 years ago." In preparation for my trip to London, I do what most people do when excited for a big trip. I watch YouTube videos on the destination to learn the ins and outs, customs, tips from locals, that kind of thing. One great channel I watched was Love in London. However, her opinions on the British Museum had me shaking my head in disagreement. She advised against visiting the museum, not because it was crowded or too much of a tourist thing to do, but rather because she believes the entire collection is stolen. Now, I get it. To that point, she's not exactly wrong. The entire collection is indeed the product of the British Empire and brave explorers venturing out, making incredible finds, and bringing it back to England for preservation. So what? It was a different time then, and it's even possible much of this collection could have been stolen, destroyed, or sold to the highest bidder in private collections before governments in these regions around the world stabilized enough and had the ability to protect them. Even today, there's a lot of chaos in places like the Middle East. Remember when ISIS utterly destroyed the statue of Buddha in Afghanistan? Those statues had been there since the 6th century, and in an instant, religious zealots destroyed them. The brave explorers, adventurers, and archaeologists are the real Indiana Jones that preserve this history for our enjoyment, all in one central location. Moving on. So, after the British Museum, I headed over to the London Eye, which is a gigantic cantilevered observation wheel on the south bank of the Thames River. Originally, I had no intention of doing the London Eye. While I am a tourist and doing touristy things, this was a bit much on the tourist side for me, as my preference was to focus more on the history side of things in London. Besides, I originally intended to do the London Sky Garden, and that would have given me an amazing view of the city in nearly 360. But some friends convinced me this was a mistake and encouraged me to do it, and I relented and bought tickets. And boy, were they right. This reminded me of Puppet Up, presented by the Jim Henson Company at Not Scary Farm. And yes, I'm sorry to compare the sights of London from above to a puppet show, but the philosophy works out. That being, don't judge a book by its cover. Not only did I end up skipping the Sky Garden due to the severe jet lag, but you missing out on an astonishing, simply incredible view like this would have been a tragedy worthy of Shakespeare. Seeing London from hundreds of feet in the air is just breathtaking, as you can imagine. We've all seen London from above from countless movies. James Bond, A Christmas Carol, Mary Poppins. The genius of the London Eye is that the full circular rotation is like a Ferris wheel, which progressively gives you a different view as you go. A full rotation takes about 30 minutes, and that's enough time for the average person to fully take in the scenery. Unlike the High Roller in Las Vegas, there is no bar in each cabin. But if you're riding an attraction like this to sit at another bar, you're completely missing the point. If interested, I will have the full 30-minute ride on the video section of the website, onedayinsocal.com, for you to see, along with a host of other videos from this trip. onedayinsocal.com. Some of the immediate sights in view include Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, Tower of London, a lot of the parks, HMS Belfast, and just so much more of the city painted across the ancient landscape. After riding the High Roller, I went to one of the many Thames boardwalk-lined restaurants and enjoyed a hamburger and some fries before setting off on a walk. For the first time, I didn't have any additional plans for the rest of the night, with the exception that I wanted to get back to my hotel to go to sleep early so that I could catch the train to Bath Spa in the morning for day 3 of the adventure. Meandering down the boardwalk, you'll find London tourists, basically a London tourist paradise, especially around attractions like the London Eye. It's here you'll find plenty of restaurants touting things like traditional fish and chips or afternoon tea, walk-through attractions like the London Dungeon, aquariums, boat rides down the Thames, street performers, scam artists, and of course, the ever-present pickpockets. I don't know about you folks, but I'm not your average tourist buried in maps and on my phone when I travel. I keep an eye on everyone and everything in my presence and have learned to grow eyes in the back of my head. So a pickpocket catching me off guard has not fortunately happened yet. In fact, I can often spot these types of people pretty quick and avoid or refuse to turn my back to them. Just use common sense when traveling and trust your gut feelings. In crowded spaces, keep your hands in your pocket. If you have a wallet in there or some other valuable, put locks on your backpacks, and in crowded areas such as the London Underground, keep your back to the wall if possible. So, Since I was leaving the London Eye, I realized how close I was to Big Ben during my rotation and set out to get a close-up look. There are tours of both Big Ben and Parliament that are available for booking, but due to the Coronation, which was just a few days away, these particular tours were closed on this trip. In the weeks up to my trip to visit London, Big Ben was also shrouded behind scaffolding as they gave the 180-year-old clock tower a facelift. Fortunately, it was complete when I arrived in London, and I got to take some great snapshots. Photos on the website, onedayinsocal.com. With Big Ben done, I headed back to the Doubletree at Tower Hill for a good night's sleep, because half of the next day's adventure entailed hours of travel by train. Having already had a chance to use the Heathrow Express Overground and the London Underground system, by day 3, I had already discovered what all the talk was about when it comes to public transportation in Europe. You probably know people that have gone to Europe and raved about the public transportation options, and I can certainly say that the hype is real. With the high prices of owning a car in London, public transportation becomes an absolute necessity for the average person. Public transportation is available at every level of travel, from going down the street a few blocks on a double-decker bus to traveling internationally by train via Channel Tunnel. For today's adventure, I set out for Bath Spa to visit a well-preserved ancient Roman bath. The city itself is called Bath Spa, 2 words, which is an interesting name for a city, I agree, but it largely fits. Besides the Roman baths, many Londoners set out to Bath Spa as a day or weekend getaway. The city is famous nationwide for its modern resorts that feature spa amenities from giant hot water swimming baths to saunas to rooftop swimming pools with a view. Just as the Romans did nearly 2,000 years ago, people still flock here for a relaxing getaway. To get here, I hopped on the London Underground back to Paddington Station and got ready to board a train on the Great Western Railway. Continuing my theme of travel and style, I booked a first-class ticket. This granted me the extra benefit of enjoying a first-class lounge at Paddington Station before departure, and naturally I took advantage of this feature. The Great Western Railway Lounge at Paddington Station isn't overly impressive, just a bunch of cheap but still new-looking furniture that looks like it was just bought straight out of IKEA. Amenities include fresh coffee, juice, and cookies for a snack. Still, as always, it beats sitting in the busy, loud terminal for most people, which lacks sitting space to begin with. Although I personally didn't mind the ambience. London Paddington is famous in many aspects, and much of the station dates back to 1854. Sprinkled around the station, if you look, are references to Paddington Bear, a character created by author Michael Bond, including a bronze statue of the bear. Boarding first class, I began the hour-and-a-half journey to Bath Spa. First class on the Great Western Railway features better seats, more room in the cars, and a light meal at your seat. In my case, it was largely unimpressive, as 2 small packaged cakes, coffee, and some juice. If memory serves, I believe I actually went to the snack bar and got a better meal. Overall, I'm not sure if I would recommend first class on the Great Western Express. The journey isn't that long for a lot of the trips, and the amenities are not worth the extra cost, in my humble opinion. I believe that standard is more than suitable for most people, but keep in mind, it will be more crowded and, as a consequence, probably louder. But if you can tolerate that for an hour and a half, I say save the extra money. Great Western Railway trains are high speed and whisk you across the western parts of Great Britain. They reminded me of our Acela trains we have in the Northeast Corridor, or maybe the train sets Brightline uses in Florida. It was such an enjoyable experience just to sit in first class at a big open window and just watch the scenery go by. The countryside in Western England, passing through small and medium-sized cities. And I kind of got vibes that I was on the island of Sordor on a Thomas the Tank Engine car, just whisking around, except we were going much faster, I guess. But anyways, upon arrival in Bath Spa, I set out immediately for the Roman Baths Museum, which was set to open at 10 a.m. As mentioned, Bath Spa is a tourist town, catering mainly to Englanders, but foreigners as well, and it shows. Nestled among all the old buildings and narrow cobblestone street alleys are all the modern amenities. Fancy restaurants, tea houses, including one cheekily called Boston Tea Party, Stores selling everything from tourist-centric shirts to cheap yet overpriced souvenirs, and posh hotels to match. I was particularly excited to see the Roman baths, as I am admittedly a huge Roman history buff. I mean, what guy isn't at this age? Remember, your life's only temporary, but the glory of Rome is forever. The Roman baths are a very well-preserved Roman bath, or thermae, as they called it, which is the Greek word for hot, in Bath, Somerset, England. Archaeological evidence indicates that the site of the baths may have been a center of worship for the Celts, an ancient people that lived across Europe. The springs were later dedicated to the goddess Solis Minerva. The Romans first came here and built a temple surrounding the baths around 60 to 70 AD, and over the next 300 years, continuously built up the structures around the baths, as well as the town. We know the Romans loved their baths, even those that were assigned or banished to this less than desirable land of Britannia. Unfortunately, for safety reasons and to preserve the bath, you cannot actually bathe in the waters. You'll want something with a little more chlorine in it, and Bath Spa has you covered with plenty of professional day spas around the city. So I arrived at the Roman baths about 15 minutes before they opened. I thought I was being clever by arriving as soon as they opened, expecting tourists to sleep in a little. I forgot all about the tour groups. In fact, the line was very long, with tour group after tour group lined up to get in. After seeing how many people were lined up, I knew I wanted to get in as quickly as possible so that I could obtain some photos of the baths without people in the background. This was before I learned about my Pixel phone's ingenious magic eraser feature, by the way. So after entering, I obtained the self-tour audio guide I ordered, and, as usual, didn't use, and headed for the square overlooking the baths. It's here you can get a bird's eye view of the baths themselves and look down upon the archaeological site. The elevated walkway over the baths is set up in a rectangular shape to match the shape of the baths, and all along at certain points are Roman statues. After getting an overview, you'll enter a stairway and go through several exhibits that meander through what's left of the buildings that surround the baths. I wanted to take the full tour, but I set a goal to photograph the baths without people in the background. So I personally rushed through to the end and got my photographs, then went all the way back up and took my time to properly walk through the exhibits. Photographs on the website, onedayinsocal.com. onedayinsocal.com. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and you could easily spend 3 hours here. There is so much to see. The myths and evidence-based history of the springs, the geological processes that bring hot water here, Roman history in this part of England or in general, the different rooms and the ritualistic process of going to the baths in the Roman Empire, the faded history and the rediscovery and continued preservation of this ancient treasure. Because while there are a few Roman bath ruins spread out across the world, mostly in Italy and modern-day Turkey, there are almost no working examples left like the Roman baths here in Bath Spa. After the baths, I headed over to the Pulteney Bridge, a bridge that crosses the river Avon and was built in 1774. One cool aspect of it is instead of being a barren bridge, it has houses and shops on it, spanning the entire length, much like a smaller version of an earlier version of London Bridge. Just below the bridge is a wire, W-I-E-R, which in this case is a triangular-shaped low-head dam that is usually present at changes in heights of a river to control water flow and prevent erosion. It creates a beautiful little rapid landscape that is famous for pictures in the shape of a triangle. Now, as I mentioned, there are a ton of restaurants, small eateries, and tea houses here in the city to cater to tourists. And a rite of passage when coming to Bath Spa is to visit the Bath Bun. The Bath Bun is a small shop, but it's named after its namesake food item, the Bath Bun. The Bath Bun has been baking here since 1761, and probably much earlier than that, as it's merely the first recorded history of Bath Bun. A Bath Bun, by the way, is basically a sweet roll made from a milk-based yeast dough with crushed sugar sprinkled on top after baking. Variation in ingredients include enclosing a lump of sugar in the bun or adding candied fruit peels, currants, raisins, or sultanas. Jane Austen, author of Pride and Prejudice, even wrote about Bath Buns, stating she was disordering my stomach with Bath Buns, which doesn't elaborate if maybe she ate a bad batch, but I assume she just ate too many because they were that good. They are excellent though. In that way, they are just sweet enough to be borderline dessert, but not so sweet that you might as well go grab a slice of cake instead. They are made with brioche buns and fill you up for your adventure ahead. Which in my case was my walk back over to the train station, my short day trip to Bath Spa over. But I still had one major adventure planned today. So let's jump back on the Great Western Express and make our way down to Windsor. Yes, that Windsor. Windsor Castle to be precise. Windsor Castle is almost as old as the Tower of London, and the history here is equally as fascinating. Built in the 11th century, shortly after the invasion of William the Conqueror, it has been used by the reigning monarch of England since King Henry I, and is the longest occupied palace in Europe. Queen Elizabeth II had a lot of castles, palaces, properties, and land across the United Kingdom, but it was no secret that her favorite was right here at Windsor Castle, and she even insisted on being buried here with her parents. More on that in a minute. Windsor Castle screams English history as much as any other famous landmark. Windsor Castle's location was specifically chosen for its many qualities of defense. Besides being built atop a hill, it was also a day's march from London itself, meaning it could allow for easy reinforcements, assuming the powers to be in London were on your side in a crisis. Many historical events since its construction have occurred here, including Henry I's marriage to Adela and the successful repel of sieges during the 13th century, such as the revolt of the English barons in 1214. John Lackland also used the castle as his base of negotiations before the signing of the Magna Carta at nearby Runnymede in 1215. John Lackland would have been King John, or Prince John if you're following the Robin Hood fable. To reach Windsor Castle, you take the Great Western Express to Slough, and then take the shortest Great Western Express line, about 2 miles and 6 minutes, to Windsor Royal Station. Just like Bath, Windsor is a true tourist town. Plenty of shops, museums, restaurants, and pubs. Everything is walkable from the train station, including the entrance to Windsor Castle itself. Because you are literally entering the home of the royal family, you'll literally need to go through an extensive security checkpoint to get in, airport style. They even checked my passport. But once you enter, you have free reign to roam around a good portion of the castle grounds. The grounds are naturally kept pristine, and the gardens below the walkway are incredibly beautiful and well kept. Everything from green grass mowed by robot lawnmowers to trees, flower bushes, ponds, and running rivers and streams. One of the highlights here is the St. George Chapel. It's here Queen Elizabeth II herself is buried. There is a small queue where you get in line and get a few seconds each to turn and look upon the vault tomb that is embedded in the floor before moving on. At the request of the palace, and out of respect, no photography is permitted here. So, if you want to see what Queen Elizabeth II's grave looks like, just do a quick Google search. I certainly followed the rules here on that. She is buried with her husband, Philip, and her father and mother, King George VI, and his wife, Elizabeth. It's definitely a somber moment, even the few seconds you get to look upon the grave of this incredible woman who was literally there on the television your entire life, even growing up in the United States. It really does hit you a bit, even as a fully red, white, and blue-blooded American. Besides the peaceful walk on the grounds, with the entirety of the round castle keep of Windsor jutting out of the walled interior grounds that are off limits, the other cool thing to do here is an actual self-guided walk through the state apartments. If you want to feel like royalty for a moment, holy smokes, have you got to take a walk through the state apartments. They don't skimp on the stateroom and apartments either, and they actually have opened up a large section of the rooms for you to explore. There are literally about 24 giant rooms you can walk through here, taking as long as you would like to enjoy every bit, tiptoeing on the same hallowed grounds that kings and queens have. The only rule here, as usual, is that they don't allow video or photography. Daft rule, because there was so much I would have loved to photograph or take video of. In each room, there is, at minimum, one palace worker keeping an eye on everyone walking through, but usually more. If they even so much as see you pull out your cell phone and think you are trying to sneak a photo, they are on you like white rice with a glass of milk and a paper cup in a snowstorm. But I am but a guest in this palace and a commoner in these lands, so, of course, as always, I respect the rules. Again, there was one exception, and I took to the no photography rule. And that's going to be later on down the line here. I'll talk about that. But As mentioned, there are a plethora of shops, restaurants, and pubs scattered all around Windsor Castle in true tourist fashion, and I settled for Carpenter Arms on 45 Market Street. This pub is one of your traditional English pubs and features lots of nooks and crannies throughout to dine, including an upstairs and basement area. It's here I ordered the shepherd's pie and the salmon on toast. The salmon was excellent, but the shepherd's pie was mediocre, if I am being completely truthful, as usual. On top of that, it didn't have a lot of meat or filling in it. I may be completely off base here. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be, but given that this was a pub in a heavy tourist area and the meal easily cost me $30, I expect a little bit more out of those prices. So with that, I headed back to Windsor Rail Station and made the return short trip to Slough. It was here I got confused at which train to take back to Paddington. I did see several Great Western Railway trains stopping and going, and I knew which direction I wanted to go, but Slough has stops for multiple lines considering how popular Windsor Castle is. What I did see stopping here at the station was an Elizabeth line train. I knew for a fact that the Elizabeth line terminates at Paddington, so I jumped on board and made my way back. With day 3 in the bag, I headed back to the hotel and prepared for what would arguably be my favorite day of the entire trip, Coronation Day. Back at the hotel, I flipped through the channels trying to get some kind of hint about what kind of chaos awaited me on the streets of London on Coronation Day, during the coronation of King Charles III. Lots of speculation, lots of expert opinion, lots of interviews, but the truth is, nobody really knew. I mean, the last time this happened was 1952. That was 70 years ago. Imagine how different the world was 70 years ago, and everything that has changed since then. It was a different world just off the heels of World War II with the promises that computers, diplomacy, and space would soon bring us. And here I was, right in the middle of London to experience it firsthand again. So, with that said, welcome to day 4. Now, regarding Coronation Day, the ideal place to be outside Westminster Abbey itself is along the mall between Buckingham Palace and the Abbey itself so that you can view the parade, procession, and of course, the royal family. The road is literally called the Mall, and people started lining up along the mall days in advance. Well, I'm on vacation, and as cool as it would be to see the royal family mere feet away from you in person for a few seconds, the reality is to do so, you would need to spend the entire night securing a spot. And adding to the sleepless night would be the moderate off and on rain that occurred all night long between May 5th and May 6th, 2023. I decided I would go with the flow on this one. I wanted to celebrate this once in a lifetime event, and I would get up several hours before the coronation, but outside that, I would see where the day took me. The only goal I set on Coronation Day was to watch the event live somewhere, preferably in the park. So after getting up and enjoying another fantastic English breakfast buffet on May 6th, 2023, I headed out. Instead of bright, sunshine skies you might expect on a day like the coronation of a new king, the skies were gray and dark with almost a certain promise of rain. While traveling around London, I highly suggest a backpack. Not only will you be able to carry around a few essentials, but you'll also be able to pack a few souvenirs you find along your travels. Essentials to carry around Europe include water, a rain poncho, jacket, and a battery backup power pack. You never know when it's going to rain. It might be a bright and sunny morning and change to heavy rain by the late afternoon or evening or vice versa. And having a rain jacket will go a long way to keep your adventure on track instead of retreating inside somewhere. I made great use of my rain jacket today, that's for sure. After setting out, instead of my usual go-to, the underground station at Tower Hill, I had one pit stop I wanted to see, which was St. Dunstan in the East Church. St. Dunstan's was an English parish church on St. Dunstan's Hill, halfway between London Bridge and the Tower of London. The church was originally estimated to have been built around the 1100s. During the Great Fire of London, it was severely damaged and patched back up. It survived all the way up to 1941 when it was severely damaged again during the Blitz. Instead of being rebuilt, they left the building as it stood, and in 1967, the ruins were converted into a public garden. And what an amazing public garden it is. The destroyed remnants of the church are haunting, and it's so peaceful and beautiful to take a stroll around the grounds. With plants growing around and through the hollowed structure, it truly does feel like you've stumbled upon an ancient ruin, or found Laputa, the castle in the sky. After this short adventure, I took the London Underground to Embankment Station, which was one of the few public transportation funnel points for people coming into central London to celebrate the coronation. Most of the other stations in central London were closed for security. Embankment Station is centrally located next to the Thames and a few blocks from St. James Park and Westminster Abbey. On Coronation Day, the entire city centre around Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey was closed off to all vehicle traffic, and select streets were open for walking. This gave a really unique view of walking in the middle of the streets of London on foot, giving you time to admire the architecture and history from all sides. The purpose was to funnel what seemed like the entire population of England through the streets to viewing points for the coronation that were set up in various parks and along the procession path between the Abbey and the Palace. In several of the parks, huge projector screens were set up, drive-in movie style, so that you could stand in the park and watch the coronation of King Charles III, which of course was occurring live just a few blocks away at Westminster Abbey. The route gave me a unique view of London, walking down the middle of the street without cars. It almost felt like a universe where cars had not been invented. As we went along, there were certain forks in the road where you could try to get a viewing spot, and they were blocked off by police telling the crowd that the viewing screen in Green Park or St. James Park had reached max capacity, and they suggested continue walking towards Hyde Park. And forget trying to view the actual procession. That filled up sometime overnight or yesterday. So I proceeded through the streets of London, following the crowd, seeing where I might end up. I was on an adventure of the highest and most historical order, and I didn't know where I was going to end up or how it was going to go. I mean, how many people could say they were present during the coronation of the King of England, or any royalty? Throughout the crowd, there were the usual people selling British flags or umbrellas or water or other coronation-themed items. It felt like every police officer in the country was here too, blocking off certain cross-section roads or just walking through the crowd. As we went along, there were police and other city workers telling people not to waste their time going to certain viewing areas as they were already full. In fact, the only one that appeared to still be open once I got closer and closer was Hyde Park. And so that became my goal. Hyde Park is the largest park in central London, dating back to 1536, when that a-hole King Henry VIII stole the land from Westminster Abbey to make it his own private hunting grounds. Keep in mind, though, it's raining off and on at a moderate rate, and with hundreds of thousands of people stomping through a park, the grounds are starting to turn into a muddy mess. Still, I soldiered on, and on the south side of the park, along South Carriage Drive, is a huge open grassy field where a huge projector screen was set up. Everybody moved forward as far as they could go, as close to the screen as possible. Some picked their way through a dense human mass in pairs or solo, like a pachinko ball, going left to right, left, right, left, right, left, in between other parties that had already staked their ground for this once-in-a-lifetime event. And being solo on this venture, I had every opportunity to inch my way closer to the screen than those in larger family groups, or even parties of two. After staking out my spot, I was content that I was maybe 100 yards from the main viewing screen, unable to move forward anymore. And once I arrived, the ceremony had just started, and I watched intently at what was occurring. I had never actually watched a coronation before, and only heard briefly about the entire process while watching British news last night and in the morning at the hotel. As the process starts, though, it began to rain at a very heavy pace, and a flurry of umbrellas popped up in the crowd, which is a shame because it starts to block the view of people in the back. During the entire event, I could hear people yelling from behind to put the umbrellas down because they were blocking the view, especially from shorter people or people that were just in the right spot where an umbrella popped up. And it was sad to see that very seldom was their cries for or requests granted. Many people in the crowd were also wearing patriotic attire for the occasion, including Union Jack suits or waving UK flags, much like we might do at a 4th of July celebration. Some had even brought party-popping streamers or kazoos. And fortunately, the city had thought this entire thing out very well. There are plenty of restrooms nearby and even paid food stalls and water refill stations that are free. Using a GoPro Hero 11, I brought with me a very tall monopod and recorded the entire crowning moment. I'll have the entire crowd reaction of the crowning on the video section of the website, onedayinsocal.com, if anyone's interested. But as indicated, the big moment finally arrives. A hush falls over the mass of people, and everyone looks up intently at the screen to witness history. Allow me to share with you some audio from that incredible moment.
The sacred anointing is done. Presentation of regalia complete. The moment of crowning has arrived. In the chair of St. Edward, King Charles III is acclaimed.
And Lord of Lords, bless, we beseech thee, this crown, and so sanctify thy servant Charles, upon whose head this day thou dost place it for a sign of royal majesty, that he may be crowned with thy gracious favour and filled with abundant grace and all princely virtues. Through him who liveth and reigneth supreme over all things, one God, world without end. Amen. God save the King!
So yeah, the fanfare music blares and everybody celebrates. It was such a treat hanging out with the peasants in Hyde Park to witness this historic moment. The real Londoners and Englanders. Just one of those moments you will truly remember for the rest of your life. What a cool experience beyond measure. After the crowning, the royal family and their entourage leave Westminster Abbey, and I start the arduous process of leaving Hyde Park, which takes a very long time as upwards of several 100,000 people create gridlock in and around the park. I have an appointment to celebrate this amazing occasion at Fortnum and Mason, where I will partake in my very first afternoon tea. There are so many choices for afternoon tea, and I chose carefully. By some miracle, on top of the miracle of being present in London for the coronation of King Charles III, I managed to obtain a solo reservation at one of the most sought-after tea houses in the entire city. On Coronation Day, no less. Fortnum and Mason. Many people think afternoon tea is a daily ritual for the British. And while it's true, many have some kind of version of it during the day, the real fancy afternoon teas are generally reserved for special occasions, like we might do by going out to Pizza Hut or Steakhouse to celebrate something like a graduation or a child's Little League victory, or that job promotion. Fortnum and Mason is technically an upmarket department store in the Piccadilly neighborhood of London, with additional locations around town and even in Hong Kong. It was first established by William Fortnum and Hugh Bason in 1707 as a grocery store, and the reputation of the company was further strengthened by their ability to supply high-quality food during the Victorian era. Even the servant shoppers at the local palaces would frequently stop in while preparing court functions for Queen Victoria or other royalty. William Fortnum was in fact originally a footman in the house of Queen Anne. Fortnum and Mason evolved into a department store and became the go-to place for buying exotic, specialty, and basic provisions in the Victorian area. Pineapples, anyone? The tea room at Fortnum and Mason is actually relatively new. First opened in March 2012, it's called the Diamond Jubilee Tea Salon because of the fact that Queen Elizabeth herself, along with Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, and Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, opened and attended afternoon tea here on day one. The tea room truly feels like something out of the Victorian era. It's cream white and accented with shades of aquamarine in the draperies and dining sets. A piano softly plays in the background, and for a brief moment, you really will feel like royalty. Surprisingly, there is no dress code here at Fortnum and Mason. So leave your dinner jacket back at the hotel, but bring that no-limit American Express card. Most people I saw in the dining room did come in with at least a polo and pants, however. Some people did elect to show up in suits and ties, and it's all good. Now, don't show up in flip-flops and gym shorts and a wife beater. I mean, have some self-respect. But just know if you're coming here as a tourist and you want to stop in, it's perfectly okay to come in, pants and a shirt. No one's going to kick you out or stare at you strangely, because they know people are on tour around the city and people aren't going to dress up in a suit and jacket to tour London. At least not anymore. Victorian days are long over. But anyways, you could tell this place was absolutely packed as soon as I walked in. And that's as you might expect on a Saturday in an historic event like this, which is certainly a great way to celebrate this occasion, isn't it? Nonetheless, service was highly attentive, as you might expect. Here at Fortnum and Mason, they don't just serve tea either. They have a large variety of different teas for you to try. Green tea, black tea, high tea, coffee, mineral water, soft drinks, beer, cider, wine, champagne, and just so much more. A typical afternoon tea at Fortnum and Mason begins off with a starter, which typically is a lobster bridge roll. The tea itself usually comes next, served in your own teapot. Genuine British afternoon tea is served loose leaf, which means you will need a strainer to pour the tea into in order to catch all the excess leaves as they fill your teacup. If you are confused at any point, like I was, have no fear. The staff here is well aware that enjoying afternoon tea is very much a touristy thing to do when in London, and will be on hand to help guide you on the proper way to conduct yourself on this dining ritual. Out next comes the finger sandwiches, and they include such savory items as smoked salmon with orange caper butter, coronation chicken, truffled Cotswold leg bar egg mayonnaise, cucumber with nut brown buttercream cheese, Welsh rarebit with oven fried tomato and caramelized shallot, duck scotch egg with pickled red cabbage, beef Wellington with Merlot sauce, twice baked goat cheese souffle, lobster omelet, Victoria with truffle, and more. Depending on which type of tea service you select, you may get a different variation, but there are 4 to choose from and probably more off menu. Classic afternoon tea, savory afternoon tea, high tea, gluten-free afternoon tea, vegetarian afternoon tea, among other options. I guess that's more than 4. But after finger sandwiches comes tea trays featuring jams, lemon curds, and of course, clotted cream. You'll need them for the famous scones that are brought out alongside the jams. Finally, your afternoon tea ends with tea cakes. This can also vary depending on what the baker decides, but options include chocolate tea cake, yuzu and lemon cheesecake, panna cotta with maple caramel and pecans, and much more. Basically, this is the dessert of afternoon tea. Some offerings were incredible. Others, I took a bite and they were not my cup of tea. No pun intended. Your incredible, perhaps once in a lifetime afternoon tea event finally ends with the bill. For an experience like this, literally fit for royalty, you are going to pay for it. I enjoyed the classic afternoon tea. My bill came out to £78, which roughly translate at the time of this podcast recording to almost $100. And of course, that excludes tip and service charge. If this is your first time in London, I can't recommend enjoying this experience enough if you can budget it. It was definitely a great way to celebrate something, including the coronation of King Charles III nonetheless. So after paying up, I immediately headed back to the Eye of London. But I wasn't going on another spin. I had tickets this evening for a showing of Broadway's newest sensation, Back to the Future, over at the Adelphi Theater in the Theater District. but managed to cram in a touristy boat ride down the Thames, courtesy of the London Eyes River sightseeing cruise. The boats that run up and down the Thames are great in general, but my experience was dampened heavily by, well, dampness, heavy rain. I stayed outside as long as I could stand it, but I realized quickly that I was about to sit in a theater for 2.5 hours and didn't want to do so soaking wet. So I retreated to the interior of the boat. The interior had large windows so you could see outside and airline style seating, but nonetheless, the heavy rain made it hard to see outside. It was okay, but I'm not sure I would do it again unless I knew for sure it was going to be bright and sunny. But that's the luck of the draw in London. It rains here. Who would have thought? If coming to London, a river cruise is generally a fantastic idea though, as you'll get a great tour of all the landmarks along the Thames in London. That includes HMS Belfast, London Bridge, Tower Bridge, Big Ben, Parliament, Tower of London, and so much more. The boat tour is about 40 minutes long, and after I was done, I headed straight for the Adelphi Theater. As of now, Back to the Future has arrived on Broadway in New York, but at the time, it was only showing in London, and I was really excited that I would have the opportunity to see this production. Just like any good geek, I have watched and enjoyed Back to the Future, all 3 parts, since I was a child. I must have watched the trilogy at least 100 times, and it's one of those movies that never gets old. I have ventured to Railtown 1897, visited places where Back to the Future was shot, such as the Twin Pines Mall, and areas around Railtown 1897 State Historic Park, and only recently attended a playing of the movie at the Hollywood Bowl, while the Los Angeles Philharmonic faithfully recreated every musical number in the movie. My text message sound is from Back to the Future on my phone, even. Ah, that's the one. Yes, I'm a fan. So, when I knew I wanted to add a Broadway show during my visit to London, it was a no-brainer. All this despite the fact that Harry Potter and the Cursed Child has a far, far greater number of sold-out performances and is the must thing to do for any London visitor. The current Adelphi Theater is the 4th theater built on the present site, which opened on December 3rd, 1930. It's been home to such productions as My Fair Lady, Marilyn the Musical, The Jungle Book, Sunset Boulevard, Chicago, Evita, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Kinky Boots, and more. The theater is currently a clash of classic and sci-fi futurism, as the front of the stage is almost exploding with circuits and technology painted in blue LED light, while the farther away you get from the stage, the more classy and warm the colors become. Something you might expect more from a theater experience. Check out the pictures on the website, of course, onedayinsocal.com. Just below the stage, like any great Broadway production, a live band plays old favorites from the Back to the Future soundtrack and new songs created just for this show. So without ruining it, the production goes through Back to the Future Part 1, the entire story. Some creative liberties are added, however, and a few slight changes to the story are made, mostly to make way for solos and musical spectacular parts of characters like Goldie Wilson and George McFly. But the story by and large remains true to the original script. Whether you are in London or New York, and eventually Los Angeles, this is an absolute must for any Back to the Future fan, and even if you are not, any Broadway musical fan. With that, I headed back to the hotel and got prepared for another adventure in London the next day. So welcome to Sunday, May 7th, 2023. After my daily traditional English breakfast, I set out to see the real side of London. I'm talking just outside the heavily tourist sections to the south side of the river, where the real Londoners live. My mission this morning was a small coffee shop stand called Happy Cat Coffee, where a man named David Harvey works. Mr. Harvey is an acquaintance I met through his benign fasciculation syndrome program he runs through YouTube and Patreon. And while I was previously going through this issue, his program helped keep my anxiety down about what the symptoms were and why they were benign as opposed to something more sinister. So he offered me a free cup of coffee, and I thought, why not? I went over, said hi. He showed me around the block in that area, and I got to meet more than a few of his friends, the real people of London. Not those that cater strictly to tourists on the other side of the river. With Coronation Day just yesterday, naturally, the events of that historic day were on everybody's mind. And one thing that truly surprised me was how divided Londoners, and by extension, those in the United Kingdom, were on the royal family. Initially, I assumed that the British were obsessed with the royals, just like they are with our celebrities here in the United States. While it is true that there are some diehard royal fans in London, as well as progressive circles here in the United States, and I saw that on Coronation Day, a good portion of opinions on the royal family are neutral, and even indifferent. In some cases, there's outright opposition to the continued tradition that is the monarchy. Mr. Harvey is one of those Londoners that sits on the opposed side, and I completely understand his viewpoints. His claims that the monarchy is an outdated system in today's modern society are valid. Perhaps the money spent on the splendor of the royal family would be better used elsewhere to improve the lives of the people in the UK. London's growing homeless problem is an example. We arrived at a flea market, which was only about a block down the road, where a lot of Mr. Harvey's acquaintances and friends were working. And walking through this flea market, I found opinions far and wide and everything in between when it came to monarchy. I could clearly see that a lot of these people are either barely making ends meet or indeed struggling, and I could see how the display of money and privilege that is the royal family would be offsetting when you are one cell away in a swap meet from making rent or going hungry. It was great to meet and talk to a few of these folks and get the real story, not the pretty painted picture on the other side of the river. Naturally, I don't really have a right to have an opinion as I'm not a UK citizen and don't really have a stake in the game. But it is interesting that to become a UK citizen, you have to swear allegiance to the Queen, or now the King. In the end, though, if I had to vote on this issue, or I had the ability to, I would tend to side on keeping the monarchy. I'm a sucker for tradition, whether that's college or fraternity tradition, Marine Corps tradition, or just family tradition. And the fact that through all the ups and downs, the British monarchy has survived this long, well into the 21st century, is truly amazing. In the United States, many look for a source of strength to unite the country. Even just a father figure to stand on TV and tell everyone that everything's going to be okay. We saw that after 9/11 when President Bush addressed the nation, for example. Many in the UK want the same thing from their monarchy. King Charles III and the royal family provide a sense of national identity, continuity, tourism, and the diplomacy that is unique to the UK alone. Surprisingly, on the wasted tax money argument, taxpayers in the UK pay an average of £4.50 to support the monarchy, while the monarchy brand generates £1.474 billion, much of which goes back to England in the form of low-cost or free tickets to national treasures like Windsor Castle, tourist hotspots so Englanders can earn a living, and fulfillment of speeches, honors, and charities for the armed forces, schools, hospitals, and more. I don't know, though. Where do you stand on the issue? OneDayInSoCal.com. Click the message me link. Anyways, after meeting up with Mr. Harvey, I made my way towards the famous Borough Market. My visit to Borough Market was brief. I had already had a full English breakfast and some coffee from Happy Cat Coffee down the street, so I wasn't hungry. But I still wanted to take a walk through and see some of the stalls, as well as some of the amazing architecture that makes up this market. One cool thing about Borough Market is that there is archaeological evidence that a market has existed on this spot since at least 1014, and probably much earlier. A market has been here well before England even became a country. In similar fashion to Grand Central Market in downtown LA, just about anything you could want to eat is here. It's a great place to take a walk right before breakfast or lunch and to find something unique and amazing to eat. It was soon time to head over towards Kensington Palace, where I had tickets for a self-guided tour of the palace itself, which is located in St. James Park. Now, the parks in London are huge. One park I was able to get a very nice long walk in was St. James Park. The British love their parks, and who can blame them? Like Central Park in New York or Griffith in Los Angeles, the parks in London are incredible. I mean, you could spend all day walking around and through them, so I only got to see a fraction of them. But a brief walk through the park got me to Kensington Palace. Now, I had a choice this afternoon between Hampton Court and Kensington Palace. The reason I chose Kensington over Hampton was because of my unhealthy hatred for that fat dictator blob that is King Henry VIII, and my love for Queen Victoria. So, it was an easy choice. Walk around and see how a disgusting, fat, murderous dictator lived, or see the beginnings of not just the UK's, arguably, greatest queen lived, but also other royalty, such as Princess Diana. Approaching the palace, which looms in the distance while walking through St. James Park, you first come upon a statue of the young queen, in all white marble. Originally a two-story mansion in 1605, Kensington Palace was constructed into the incredible property it is now in 1689. For the next 70 years, Kensington Palace was the favorite palace of the monarchy, including Queen Anne, George I, and George II. After the ascension of George III, the palace was used for minor royalty, such as the sixth son of George III. But the most famous resident, arguably, to live in Kensington was Alexandrina Victoria, aka Queen Victoria. Most of the palace is a self-guided tour format and basically caters to how Queen Victoria lived here when she was young. They still have the room set up where Victoria learned her uncle, King William IV, died, and had her first Privy Council. The room is still set up in much of the way it was on that first historic day. So, my only annoyance when I came here was the start of the tour, which was, in fact, turned into some kind of version of a glitzy modern fashion show. Amidst the backdrop of historical rooms and architectural treasure stands mannequins in ridiculous dresses that resembled something out of the Hunger Games as opposed to history. Designer dresses from which virtually nobody would wear, or nobody could, even if they wanted to, set to modern art music vibe, and, if memory serves, fashion show music. And keep in mind, you are forced to at least walk through this part of the palace to get to the good stuff. Because my eye was focused on history, I didn't pause long in these rooms, perhaps briefly to admire Georgian or Victorian architecture before moving on. But please, do not let that decide you. If there are original rooms and artifacts here for you to view. Fireplaces, original oil-filled heaters, Victorian furniture, portraits and paintings, red velvet wallpaper and carpet, chandeliers and rooftop paintings that resemble something out of the Sistine Chapel, and of course the belongings of Her Majesty Queen Victoria's emerald necklace, earrings and brooch, her emerald tiara, Victoria's toys as a child, including dollhouse and scraps from her journal, pocket watches, and more, all in the royal apartments, and you get to self-tour all of this as part of your admission. You can take as long as you want to. You'll learn basically some of the history too, such as about her birth, her childhood, her teenage years, and when the news finally came to her, here in the palace, that she was queen of the most powerful empire in the known universe. You'll learn about her controlling mother and the man behind her mother's control freak behavior, Sir John Conroy. And the tour of the palace ends in the room where she was informed that she was queen. Side note, a fantastic show that does the best job at telling the story of Queen Victoria from young girl to ruling queen is the British ITV historical television drama Victoria, starring Jenna Coleman. With the exception of a few artistic liberties, the show is true to the story and drama that surrounded Victoria, from her time at Kensington Palace all the way up to the christening of the Crystal Palace. As of this podcast recording, I believe it is still free to watch on Amazon Prime Video. I mean, listen to the intro of the series so you know you found the right show. How can you say no to a show that has an intro like this? Okay, so the end of the tour takes you to a grand staircase which drapes over a room and back to the start of the tour itself. Before exiting the grand staircase, one last notable spot at the top of the staircase. It's here on May 18th, 1836, that Princess Victoria met Prince Albert for the very first time. And there's a sign here along with Victoria's thoughts on the encounter from her journal. After exiting the palace, I worked my way towards Kensington High Street for my first and only double-decker bus ride. I only went a few stops, but it was truly an enjoyable experience. Somehow I managed to get the second floor front row spot, which is the ideal spot when riding a double-decker bus. Watching from above as London business, as usual, rolls by on both sides. My stop was a true tourist attraction that most Londoners would probably roll their eyes at, in the same way many of us here in Southern California would roll their eyes at people actually buying stuff from Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. I'm talking, of course, about Harrods of London, the ultra overpriced multi-level tourist hotspot that screams no limit credit card. It is what it is, I guess. My schedule is truly limited, and I had gifts to check off my list, and the convenience of 5,000 brands within 8 floors taking up most of the city block can't be beat for time, even if I did have to pay more. Don't get me wrong at all. There are celebrities and rich Londoners that shop here, consistently. What I mean is, if you're looking for souvenirs and stuff, yes, it's kind of cool to have stuff from London's Harrods, but you are going to pay a lot more for it. You could probably find just as authentic stuff in other parts of the city. Harrods is massive, and you could easily spend, especially if you love shopping, 2 to 3 hours here just exploring. It's not only divided by floors, but is subdivided on each floor by brands. The main escalator in the middle has an Egyptian theme to it, feeling like you're ascending or descending a great pyramid instead of a department store. This is the place to shop if you're looking to purchase the world's top brands. I'm talking Prada, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Chanel, Rolex. Insert exotic name here and buy a purse made in China for $10,000 so you can be cooler than your friends and, more importantly, your enemies here, etc. Like any great department store, it's not just divided by brands, but also by sections, such as the men's section, the women's section, a children's section, electronic goods, and some great dining areas as well. Last time I've been to a department store this big, I was in Tokyo. So it'd been a long time since I traversed a building basically the size of a city block that was like 8 floors or so. A lot of fun to explore nonetheless. The first floor features a great market selling bakery goods, tea, or freshly butchered meats. It's definitely a fun place to spend a few hours, especially if your significant other likes to go shopping. But in general, you can find a place like this in any major city around the world, whether that's Hong Kong, Tokyo, Los Angeles, or New York. Still, I hear you ladies. Buying that exotic perfume from here and being able to beat your girlfriends back home by informing them that it was purchased in the one and only Harrods of London, England, is certainly an enjoyment that many can't pass up. Without being too much of a hypocrite, I did relegate myself to a movie theater in Leicester Square, the Odeon Theater, where I spent a good 2 to 3 hours of my ever so precious vacation time watching Guardians of the Galaxy 3. So there's that. But after leaving Harrods, I was certainly getting pretty hungry. And, well, it's Sunday in London. And we all know what that means, of course, right? Well, it means it's time for a Sunday roast. And I know that English food has been criticized heavily, and based on my meals here, not necessarily unjustifiably. I've had decent meals while visiting London, and I've had some meals, okay meals while visiting London. But through all that criticism, the Sunday roast is where England gets it right. A traditional Sunday roast is served on Sundays and features roasted meat, usually beef, as well as mashed potatoes, roasted potatoes, and usually is accompanied by Yorkshire pudding, stuffing, gravy, and can feature any variety of vegetables. I mean, this meal was excellent, and carefully choosing a restaurant to enjoy this traditional meal, I decided to go with Harksmoor near Spitalfields. When I first entered this restaurant, I was confused, thinking I entered the wrong door. A set of stairs leads into a basement where the elegance of the restaurant opens up. After checking in, I was led to the dining hall and my table. Harksmoor has a large variety of British cuisine outside the Sunday roast, but Sunday roast is another great British tradition that shouldn't be missed, in my humble opinion. So, I gave you a little hint earlier, but my next stop was to go see Guardians of the Galaxy 3. There's not much to tell. Going to the movies in London is very similar to going to the movies in the USA. Right down to the big screen, reclining seat, popcorn in your right hand, Coca-Cola in your left. By the time I was done crying at what I witnessed in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I was on my way back to the hotel to prepare myself for what would be the last full day in London, and the greatest of the entire trip outside the Coronation. All right, folks. I've seen a lot of London. There was still so much to see, but not bad for a week-long adventure. But there's still one place that should not only be on your bucket list when coming to London, but should probably be prioritized as number one. I can definitively say that this place was, without doubt, the greatest place I visited in London, and it truly had me floored. This place is the exact location of 39 royal coronations, 16 royal weddings, the exact burial place of no less than 30 monarchs. Enter the truly one and only Westminster Abbey. And by the grace of God himself, I managed to snag tickets to this historical treasure just 2 days after the coronation. It was looking pretty sketchy too when booking. Recall that when planning my trip to London, the coronation of King Charles III was announced after I had already booked the trip and started booking places. Well, Westminster Abbey was accepting bookings a week after the coronation, but not when I was going. Because I emailed the Abbey with a just-in-case attitude, not only did I manage to snag tickets to the Abbey, but I was notified by an amazingly dedicated employee through email the very instant the tickets became available. Not only did I get to go, but all the coronation regalia, decorations, and chairs were still up, waiting to be taken down, including the famed coronation chair itself. My visit to the Abbey was truly like winning the lottery. Never will I consider myself so lucky as May the 8th, 2023. As amazing as Westminster Abbey is, I assumed I would be relegated to a guided tour of the palace. I was further excited to find out that I could take a self-guided tour of this church, or this cathedral, at my own pace. I could look at all the details up close, or gaze up and stand in absolute awe, jaw-dropping awe at what I was witnessing. Walking into the Abbey, you can't help but look up and see how majestic this cathedral is. How far it goes up and how wide and expansive it is, all the nooks and crannies. It was, I was in much awe today in 2023 as a peasant would have been in the 1200s. Both of us never having seen anything so incredible. Every inch of the Abbey is a masterpiece of intricate detail. Gold and marble and bronze and busts and statues and art from the entirety of the English history. But what really sets you back is all the tombs. Tombs of the most important people in England's history. Many of them right here. Walking down one nondescript and unimpressive passageway to the left, I'm led around the corner to a grand tomb of the one and only Queen Elizabeth I. Looking up close at her, you realize all those history lessons, all those documentaries, all those TV shows. She's right here in front of you, behind a few inches of stone. And the same goes for some of the other notable burials here. Edward the Confessor in 1066, King Henry III, Edward III and his queen, Philippa of Hainault, Henry V, James I, Charles II, Queen Anne, William III, even Mary, Queen of Scots, who tried to have her own cousin assassinated, is just a few steps away from Elizabeth herself. Beyond the monarchs comes the memorial markers of some of England, the British Empire, and the UK's greatest citizens. Sir Isaac Newton, John Gay, Sir Robert Murray, Sir William Elphinstone, George Frederick Handel, Stephen Hawking, David Livingstone, Lawrence Oliver, and of course, the unknown warrior from World War I. Keep in mind that outside of its coronation, wedding, and funeral duties, Westminster Abbey is a full-service Church of England. You can, in fact, attend services here free of charge virtually every day of the year, with some exceptions. Just don't expect to have the ability to explore the Abbey freely, as if you purchase tickets. One cool aspect of Westminster Abbey is the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Galleries. You have the option to take an elevator, or if you're an adventurer in dire need of exercise like me, walk up a set of wooden stairs to the top levels of the Abbey. When most people think of Westminster Abbey, they think of the main floor. But there are naturally basements and top levels of this Abbey as well. The Queen's Diamond Jubilee Galleries display some of the greatest treasures that have ever been found at Westminster Abbey over the course of its 1,000-year history. The secret space above the Abbey itself had been hidden for over 700 years and never opened to the public until 2018. And you were born in the right era to get the chance to see it. Original royal marriage licenses, effigies of heads of monarchs, altarpieces from hundreds of years ago, and original Bibles still in Latin, among other priceless art, relics, and church pieces. Some of it stored away, forgotten in the Abbey. Some of it was dug up or found during refurbishments over the years. Keep in mind that these galleries require a separate entrance ticket. As always, when booking any trip, London or otherwise, book well in advance. But the biggest reason you want to come up here is the view. You get a view of the Abbey below most people don't get to see. Not just because most people will never have the chance to visit, but because photography is not permitted up here. Now, on that note, I am very, very respectful of British laws and customs, and that includes respecting the well-founded policies that have been set up at historical places like Westminster Abbey. But I did break the rule just once when nobody was looking to take a photograph of Westminster Abbey from above. I mean, I couldn't resist. I was willing to sit in jail for this photo, if necessary. If you want to see that photo, check out the website, onedayinsocal.com. It's just a grand photo and a unique view that most people don't get to see. All right, honestly, folks, I could have stayed here easily all day. There is that much to explore, that much to see, little hidden treasures, little corners that turn into something major, unexpected surprises. It's just a place to really explore, and it does. It sets you back, and at all these great people that are buried here that shaped not just England or the British Empire, but honestly the world in some cases. But even areas around the Abbey are incredible, such as the long hollowed hallways walked by countless priests and friars, quiet little enclosed gardens. Westminster Abbey is one somber but thrilling place, to the point where you just stand in the middle of it in sheer disbelief. You are overwhelmed at what you're seeing and how much has actually happened here. It's almost as if your brain can't even fathom. It's just too much to take in. But I did have a schedule to keep, and the next place on my checklist was Trafalgar Square. Unfortunately, most of Trafalgar Square was closed off during my visit. I mean, I could still visit Nelson's Column, but a lot of it was being used as temporary storage from the Coronation 2 days earlier. It wasn't the same. Walking around Nelson's Column, I was even yelled at by a group of migrants doing heavy lifting of moving fencing into storage boxes because I was walking in an open square and didn't realize that I wasn't allowed to be there. There was no fences blocking me or signs or anything. So needless to say, that soured my visit to Trafalgar Square by a lot, and I moved on. Next up on the itinerary was a ride on a waterbus down Regent's Canal. This was something I added late and last minute to my itinerary, but when I realized I wanted to take a quick walk around Camden Market, I saw there was a really unique way to get there, by canal boats. Now, when most people think of canal boats, they tend to think of Venice, right? But the canal boats here in England are more industrial and purpose-built, much longer with engines and space for dozens of passengers or cargo. In fact, the longest canal boat is 72 feet long. Many are not far off from that length and only about 6 or 7 feet wide as well. Now relegated to tourist attractions or liveaboards in the canals around England, these boats, also known as water buses, canal barges, or narrowboats, were transportation options that were vital to carry passengers and cargo from busy rivers such as the Thames into the interior of great cities like London. These water buses are featured in different parts of the country and allow you to ride down some of England's 4,700 miles of canals that stretch across the country. I first became clued in on travel by canal in England when I saw a documentary about a narrow gauge railway in Wales. One part of the episode was talking about long motorboats that travel by narrow channels, sometimes only 10 feet across or so, and sometimes going through long, dark tunnels. The longest one is the Standage Tunnel, which is 3 1/4 miles long and takes about 2 hours to go through. Talk about the Mines of Moria. The one we would go through on Regent's Canal here in London takes only about 5 minutes or so. The particular service I chose was the London Waterbus Company's 45-minute ride down Regent's Canal. Regent's Canal opened in 1820 and linked the Grand Union Canal and the River Thames at Limehouse. Once you show your tickets and board the boat, a safety brief is given and you are on your way. The captain of the boat pilots from the rear, carefully steering the boat from the very back and outside the cabin itself. Along the way, one of the operators will narrate the trip, informing you about the history of the canal, other narrowboats that are tethered to the side of the canal, many of the people that live in mansions that dot the scenery, and some of the animals that live in and around the canal as well. Speaking of animals, Regent's Canal passes right through the northern part of Regent's Park and directly through the London Zoo. There are, in fact, several exhibits that are fenced off right along the canal, including the monkey exhibits. And if you are lucky, you will certainly spot a few. Once you get to Camden Market, you'll deboard and the boat will make the return trip. And there's basically, I don't know, probably about a dozen trips back and forth all day long, carrying passengers, tourists, and actual people that are commuting. The boats run several times throughout the day, and a ride will cost you about £15 one way. One of their boats, the Perseus, is 86 years old as of this podcast recording, and was built by Harland and Wolff in 1935. The same people that built the Titanic. This is still very much a tourist thing to do, but if you are looking for something very unique and quiet that's away from the hustle and bustle of central London tourists, I highly recommend it. Now, no trip to the UK is complete without enjoying a traditional fish and chips. The restaurant I chose for this was Poppy's Fish and Chips. Fish and chips are a fun, guilty pleasure and a great old-fashioned British classic. The tempting aroma of the salt and vinegar draws you in, and the crunch and batter on the fish, or the crisp on the chips, is irresistible and keeps you coming for more. Poppy's has perfected this recipe and has been serving up this meal since 1952. And like In-N-Out in the United States serving hamburgers, fish and chips is what Poppy's specializes specifically in. Poppy's goes a step further though. You can actually choose specific fish to enjoy, such as haddock, cod, halibut, skate, rock, lemon sole, mackerel, and more. So that concluded Monday, and I had to head back to the hotel much earlier than usual because I would need to get up very early for my all-day adventure to Paris, France the next day. It's here I would like to go over some of the places I unfortunately had on my itinerary, but was forced to miss. Forced to miss for one reason or another. The first of which is London Sky Tower. I had reservations for a restaurant at the top of London Sky Tower the evening of my arrival in London. The Sky Tower is a free attraction, and when you visit, you can gain a near 360 view of London, as long as you reserve the tickets early enough. Unfortunately, I was so exhausted upon landing, as you might remember from episode 28, that I had no choice but to skip this and take a nap. I also wanted to see the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, but for some reason, I could not get around to making the 10 a.m. event at Buckingham Palace. I originally placed this on my itinerary on Sunday, May 7th, but instead decided to visit a friend on the other side of the river. I was on a tight schedule, and each day I was busy at 10 a.m., so I could not make it over to Buckingham Palace. I also wanted to visit Green Park, located just north of Buckingham Palace, and one of the smaller parks surrounding the royal residence. Still, there was a section called Speaker's Corner that I wanted to check out and see what some of the speakers were talking about on their soapboxes. Hampstead Heath was something I was truly looking forward to that I couldn't make work on the schedule. I really, really wanted to walk through a couple miles of pristine English forest, as though tiptoeing around like Robin Hood, or perhaps just a peasant in the 1500s making the journey from my village to the big city of London on foot. Unfortunately, Hampstead Heath is about an hour each way on public transit, and 2 hours was more than I could spare, unfortunately. Today, those of us living in the hustle and bustle of city life go to the forest for recreation, to decompress, get away from it all, find some kind of inner peace, or just quiet the mind so we can think clearly for a few minutes. I know I've done so when I needed to make a big decision on the direction of my life, but from the 1800s and backwards, forests were terrifying places, the stuff of nightmares. Real and imagined dangers existed in the forests. Everything from highwaymen to gangs of murderers to witches and beasts straight out of the Harry Potter films. People, friends and family went into the woods, and some never came back, and it still happens today. Whether becoming disoriented and lost, suffering from a medical emergency, or the victims of a murderous gang, many mysteries are still unsolved to this day. Even today in forests around the world, people still believe in things like Bigfoot or the Bell Witch of Tennessee. Horror films like Cabin in the Woods or the Blair Witch Project continue to capitalize on our fears. Fortunately, in Hampstead Heath, it's virtually impossible to get lost as the entire wood is surrounded by the city. Hampstead Heath is nonetheless one of the largest and best preserved woodlands near London that still exist. The rest utterly destroyed by the wood-eating beast that is progress. Today, most of the great forests that once took up a majority of England are gone, and while the UK grapples with the consequences, other developing nations such as Brazil are grappling with the same decisions. albeit with hindsight knowledge of the consequences. Unfortunately, I would miss out on my walk through an English wood on this trip. No chance to pretend I was part of Robin Hood's band of merry men. I also planned to visit the Sherlock Holmes Museum, which is actually located at the real address the fictional detective lived, at 221B Baker Street. But, as always, time was not on my side and I had to shelve the visit. Just down the street from the museum is Regent's Park, which many liken to the park most closely resembling the one from Mary Poppins across from the Banks' house. And unfortunately, once again, had to skip out. But anyways, those were the only places that I couldn't make work in the schedule. And I headed back to the hotel. I went to bed very early on a Sunday night because Monday morning was going to be a long day. And I would need to be up at around 4 a.m. to meet my departure at 6:01 a.m. The day had arrived. I was going on vacation from my vacation, or holiday as it's called in the UK. Off to France. So here we are on a Tuesday, and bright and early on a dark 4 a.m. morning, I lumbered out of my bed. My transportation to Paris would leave London St. Pancras International Station at 6:01 sharp. And I still had to go through security and passport control. The buffet was closed this early in the morning, so I just skipped out on breakfast and headed straight to Paddington Station, which had almost become a second home with how many transfers I had used at the station. But London St. Pancras was a whole new animal. It felt more like an international airport, with TSA-style security to boot. The station has a 5-star hotel built right into the station, the London St. Pancras Renaissance Hotel. London St. Pancras has been serving passenger rail traffic in London since 1868. The added London St. Pancras International was added to the name in 1994 when the first passenger rail service began shuttling people between London and Paris. It's an international train station thanks chiefly to the Channel, or more properly, the Channel Tunnel as they prefer to call it in Europe. The Channel Tunnel is a true modern marvel and a feat of human engineering at the end of the 20th century. The tunnel is over 31 miles long and runs completely underneath the English Channel between Kent, England, and Calais, France. When riding the Eurostar between London and destinations in Europe, you ride up to 99 miles per hour down to 377 feet under the ocean in complete darkness. That takes about 25 minutes. The 99 miles per hour limit is being enforced for safety reasons. That's hardly the top speed of the Eurostar. But just through the Channel Tunnel, you're going to be going just under 100 miles an hour. Thanks to the Channel Tunnel, travel to virtually anywhere in Europe by rail from London is now a reality, including Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, Cologne, and more. And that's just the point-to-point destination with no transfer. The reality is trains connect all of Europe together and offer travel without airplanes. Just think, a trip to London can be extended now to France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Turkey, Eastern Europe, and more. Or you can go my route and add a day trip outside of London, a vacation from your vacation, and vice versa. Think Disneyland Paris or walk in the red light district of Amsterdam. The Eurostar advises getting to the station of your departure a bare minimum of 90 minutes before. But realistically, going through security is very quick. One cool aspect of traveling by train on the Eurostar is the fact that you go through passport control before you even enter the country you are traveling to. After going through security at London St. Pancras, you go through passport control and immigration by officers from the country you are traveling to, which means as soon as your train arrives at your destination, you get off and you're free to walk away. Your adventure begins immediately. Previously, there was no passport control between the UK and the European Union because the United Kingdom was part of that union. But since Brexit, passport control has become standard again. Nonetheless, it's largely quick and painless, usually automated and takes just a few moments. The Eurostar has 3 travel classes on board: Standard, Standard Premier, and Business Premier. Standard allows 2 bags and a decent seat on the train, and that's about it. There is a snack bar on the car, so you'll be able to actually grab something to eat if you're hungry or get some coffee. And they're available on virtually all Eurostar trains if you need refreshments, which, if you're traveling between London and Paris, takes about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Standard Premier is what I chose for this trip. You'll be upgraded to a better seat with more room to stretch out in the car and a light meal delivered directly to you. I was very much underwhelmed with the offerings on the Great Western Express. The offerings they offered at my seat when I booked first class. But the Eurostar was fantastic. You'll dine on real Eurostar branded porcelain, glass, and silverware, and receive such offerings as a large cinnamon roll, fruit, yogurt, water, and juice. While hardly the grand slam at Denny's, it was adequate enough to get me going and the first meal I had all morning. Business Premier is on a whole nother level. And while I certainly don't mind going all out on a once-in-a-lifetime type vacation like this, a 2-hour and 15-minute one-way ticket in Business Premier was upwards of several $100s. There does get to a point where I start to weigh the cost with the type of product and time I get to spend with it, and once we start entering several $100 territory for 2 hours, I'm out. Still, if you are willing to part with that kind of cash, think very spacious and luxurious seats, 3-course meal served with champagne at your seat by Michelin-starred chef Raymond Blanc, complimentary cold and hot drinks, priority boarding, and security lines, as well as exclusive Eurostar lounge access, similar to an airport lounge you might find at an airport. You'll also enjoy a generous baggage allowance of up to 3 pieces, if needed. Once I arrived at London St. Pancras, I went through security and got my official stamp of approval from the French government that I was allowed into the country. I then entered a large waiting area with everyone else on the train. There were certainly several hundred, if not 1,000 people waiting for the same 6:01 first train of the day. In the waiting area, there are several shops that sell food or travel and souvenir-related merchandise. And about a half hour before departure, announcements are made that they have started boarding, and the glass gates to the escalators that lead you to the boarding platform are opened. There are so many people trying to board the Eurostar that I would advise just waiting while everybody else gets up and shuffles their way slowly in line towards the escalator. Seats are assigned anyway, so you're not missing anything. But at the top, everyone spreads out, and the cars have digital LED displays outside each one. The displays will have a letter of the alphabet in order, so finding your specific assigned coach is a breeze. The train leaves promptly, and soon enough you'll be whizzing past the urban expanse of London, through the dense green field and trees of southern England, and through the dark and quiet tunnel through the endless fields of France, and finally into the dense, modern sprawl of Paris. The Eurostar arrives at Paris Gare du Nord, which literally means Paris Station of the North. And convenient transfer options exist here at the station as well, whether you are boarding another train to another city, going to Disneyland Paris, or want to hop on the metro and get into the city center of Paris and all the tourist destinations that wait. So upon exiting the Eurostar, you'll walk through the train station, and it looks very similar to any major train station you experienced in London. But once you get to the end of the station and walk out those large doors onto Rue d'8 Mai, 1945 Street, and yes, that's the name of it, translation 8th of May, 1945, which is literally the day the German army surrendered during World War II. But once you walk onto the streets of Paris, with its stereotypical French architecture, it hits you. I'm in France. Paris, France. Now, I just spent several days exploring London, and now there was seemingly limitless potential in a whole new city to explore. But I only had one day, and I had to cherry pick what I wanted to do very carefully. Unfortunately for me, it was pouring rain, and I would have to contend with the rain for most of the day. But that's the luck of the draw when planning a major vacation months out. If you grant me at this long hour into the podcast, I'd like to do a little compare and contrast with the Paris Metro and the London Underground. In my experience, the Paris Metro is no competitor to the London Underground. The Tube in London is the ultimate public transportation system that everybody in the world should try to copy. And I've ridden a lot of public transportation systems across the country and around the world. While the transportation options in Paris are available to most places you would want to go, they tend to be very crowded, standing room only on virtually every train I rode all day long. The Metro in Paris is certainly intimidating for first-timers like me, and for good reason. There are few to no signs, even in French. It's almost an insider knowledge transportation system sometimes. When in London, I could simply tap and go with my phone or watch each time I rode the Underground or a bus in London. In Paris, there's no options for that. You have to go find not just a ticket machine, but one that actually translates into English. Then you have to navigate the clunky menu system to find the right ticket you want. The day pass, the monthly pass, one trip, round trip, multiple tickets, discount options. it's a royal pain that desperately needs updating. Like literally on the underground in London, I just had my card set to my watch, my Garmin watch. And each time I got to the stall, all I'd have to do was tap and remember to tap out, and it would calculate the fare automatically for me. No tickets, no apps, no accounts. It was really that simple. And I hope Paris catches up with the rest of the world. But further, by the way, when I finally found the ticket machine, now that the Eurostar arrived, there was a huge line of English-speaking people for the two machines, seemingly in the entire station, that actually were in English. And because the system is so outdated and clunky, it takes about 5 minutes per person to actually figure out how to purchase the tickets each group wants. So getting metro tickets took me about 30 minutes or so. Now, I'm not saying that they should have to cater to English speakers or anybody of any language, but either update the system or have an option on each terminal to change the language just for one transaction. Let it go back to French automatically. I mean, this is France. I'm a guest here. I can use Google Translate or otherwise, but I don't know. I just think something has to change here because it was such a pain trying to figure out how to get from one place to another. There was lack of signs, lack of information. And that wasn't even all the woes that I faced when I first got to France. During this time, I regretted not going to the bathroom one last time on the Eurostar, and I really, really had to take a leak by the time I got down to the ticket machine. And there's no option just to go back and get on the Eurostar quick and go. Once you leave those gates, you're out until your train leaves that evening. So I did a little dance, and after purchasing my tickets, I went to find a restroom. Huge train station, you would think, okay, lots of people here transferring, coming in, leaving, waiting. There's just probably a restroom somewhere. Virtually all major train stations in England and the United States not only have restrooms, but they allow you to use them for free. What a concept. Well, in France, you have to pay for restrooms in public tourist areas. Call it a cultural thing or what, but you have to pay. Now, that's fine. I had to go so bad that I didn't care what it cost. I was willing to part with upwards of $50 to get 30 seconds with a clean porcelain urinal. Problem was, the public restroom here was closed with no indication of when it would reopen or where the next nearest restroom was. Well, my first itinerary item in Paris was the catacombs, and with little choice, I set out bouncing around like a poor soul suffering from Parkinson's disease, getting stares from French folks as I did everything in my power to hold it in. So I had to board the metro from Gare du Nord all the way to Denfert-Rochereau, and I'm going to be killing these French words here. I apologize in advance. Anybody that's in France or speaks French. But I'd be traveling on the B line, which took nearly another 20 minutes, then stand in line at the catacombs just to get in. And as a bonus, keep in mind, it's raining heavily, and that's not helping. I finally got to go through security, and I'm about to explode, but there's no bomb on me. I finally enter the museum and ask for the restroom, and am shown the way to my favorite location in France thus far, the restroom in the catacombs. They say you don't know what you have till it's gone, and a restroom consistently fits this bill for me. France, I don't know if you care or not, but so far, not a great impression in my first 30 minutes. Well, I guess I've been here for at least an hour and a half now, but for the love of God, make sure you use the restroom before you get off the train, or pack some adult diapers. Otherwise, you're going to regret it. Anyways, I was here at the catacombs, and I could finally focus on enjoying my day in Paris, as opposed to the endless suffering that having to use the restroom brings. We all know the feeling. But the catacombs. If Westminster Abbey was a celebration of English monarchs, nobles, and those that made history with its countless graves, the catacombs was a somber, if not very serious monument to the countless unknown, unsung heroes that lived, worked, and died poor in Paris, France. These countless men and women, numbering in the millions, that are laid to rest in pieces and on top of each other, received no such fanfare, even though philosophically their life was of no less value. I mean, these folks put their pants on the same way as the king and the privileged few. in the morning and went to work. And this is where they're at. The catacombs were created out of necessity when, near the end of the 18th century, Paris' cemeteries were full after multiple outbreaks of disease. Much of the catacombs was originally mines, nearly 300 kilometers of them that were used as stone for buildings. A decision was made in the late 18th century to deal with the oversaturation of Parisian cemeteries by reburying the dead in the mines. And good thing, too. The overfilled cemeteries were indeed causing health issues, including leaching into the water supplies. I wasn't sure how I was going to react to this. Working in law enforcement and even during a college course, I have seen dead bodies, more than my fair share. I've seen how fragile life is to the universe and how meaningless it is to some people. Would I have deep emotional feeling, or would I just would this just look like something out of Not Scary Farm or Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios? The first section of the catacombs after entering is a museum featuring the history and more information on the 1 mile walk you're about to embark deep underground, Indiana Jones style. Dimly lit, damp, cold, and deadly quiet, with water seeping its way down from above, especially during a heavy rainstorm, and hitting you sometimes unexpectedly as you walk. Sometimes there are groups of tourists in areas, so you have some living company, but other times it almost feels like you're the only living thing here. After the museum, a series of circular stairs takes you down into the depths, and it does take a good 5 to 7 minutes to get down the 65 feet or so underground. Once you are down there, it gets quiet. There is an incredible stillness to the air, and it feels like the weight of the entire world is pressing down from above. It's a place of absolute terror for those that are afraid of the dark or claustrophobic. Do not even consider this if you think you're even slightly claustrophobic. Fortunately for me, I'm not, so I pressed forward. First half of your walk in the catacombs is empty. You'll turn hallways guided by a well-worn, trafficked underground road with signs and closed sections preventing you from going off course and making sure you don't get lost like others have in the past before it became a tourist attraction. In 1785, the process began. As you walk through the catacombs, you will see carvings of dates going back as far as the 1700s, sometimes with messages or small monuments near bones. While some bones are indeed dumped into large areas, some took great care to stack the bones, even making intricate art-like designs, hearts or crosses or other religious symbols. Outside of this, there really are very few monuments to the millions of Parisians that are buried here. Each skull you pass by is a real, nameless figure that lived, worked, and died hundreds of years ago. The experience for me was one of amazement, wonder, and just a pinch of sadness. I really did wonder about each skull looking back at me. Who was this person? Where did they live? What did they do for a living? Did they serve in the military? Who or what did they love? Who or what did they hate? If they could do it all again, what would they change? What could they teach us? And, what was their final moments like? Did they die with friends and family at their side or scared and alone? And calculating the millions and millions of dead people here, did even one of them possibly imagine that this is where they were going to end up? Down in a dark mine with some goofy tourists staring at them back? There is a true reverence here by every tourist that I walked by. Nobody is laughing or being loud or rude or annoying. Everyone is likely thinking the same thing I was. At the end of the self-guided tour, I hope you hit the Stairmaster for your planned trip to Paris, because it's right back up the spiral staircase to the gift shop. Upon arriving, I noticed it was raining even harder, an outright downpour. One thing they do right before you leave, if you are carrying a backpack, is check it to make sure you aren't taking any bones with you as a souvenir. Apparently that's a thing and has happened before, and given my knowledge of the human race, why am I not surprised? And by the way, one side note about the backpack. It says on the website that you can bring a small bag with you. Since I am on foot all day, I tend to carry a medium-sized backpack with everything I need in it for the day. Water, camera gear, a light rain jacket, beanie, etc. I was actually kind of concerned when I came here, as my backpack is technically just barely bigger than the size allowance prescribed on the website, but I was happy that they let me in anyways without any fuss. I think the policy is in place because guests have probably tried to get away with entering the catacombs with outrageously sized backpacks at one point or another, which increases the risk of bumping into bones. It worked for me, but you should be aware, because if they deny you, there is absolutely nowhere else to store your backpack, and if your nearest place to do so is your hotel one country over, it can end your trip to the catacombs before it begins. One thing they will make you do is wear it in front of you, again, to reduce the chance of accidentally backing into and damaging the human bones that are here. The catacombs left an incredible impression on me, as it probably will you, if you can or have the courage to come here. I mean, my experience with this type of stuff is Halloween. Fake skeletons in people's yards, walking through mazes at Knott's Scary Farm, or haunted houses at Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios. To see the real thing in the millions and knowing all around you, not under you, for miles in pitch black darkness is a literal gravesite of millions of people. It's a sobering thing. It's easy to pick up a history book and hear about the bubonic plague, or a particular brutal battle, or read a Wikipedia article on a natural disaster and see numbers in front of your face and not even contemplate how big that is. It's human nature, I suppose, and I'm not faulting anybody for it, but when you come face to face with the very lives, millions of them, that were taken and utterly destroyed by something like bubonic plague, it takes on a whole new meaning for you. It's one of those things that sticks with you for a long time, and you think about it from time to time after the shock wears off. But in any case, outside of the Eiffel Tower, this probably should be on everyone's list as the most important thing to do when coming to Paris. Again, if you can handle it. It's clearly not for everyone. Anyways, as I mentioned, I reappeared into the cool, damp Paris air and started walking towards a metro station. My next stop was the Eiffel Tower, but I was several miles away from there on a limited schedule, and it was raining heavily, as I mentioned. Fortunately, a metro station was only 2 blocks away. Now, anyone that knows me knows I'm a railway buff, and I was expecting a subway, but when I arrived, I came upon this half-train, half-bus looking thing. Instead of rails, it was running on tires, but it was connected together tightly like a subway, and it is propelled by having a secondary set of horizontal tires that would push against the sidewall and spin it forward, if that makes any sense. This was not a train to me, and was more like a tram, or some kind of tram on a guided track, I guess. Anybody that's actually been to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, it's similar to that. But in any case, I headed over to the closest station to the Eiffel Tower, which was Ben Hakim Station, and wound up in a pretty hairy situation that could have resulted in violence or me in jail while I was making my way over to the Eiffel Tower. Anyone that knows me knows I will not walk away from someone who is being victimized and needs help. I will stand between you and the thug and use any lawful means to defend me and you if necessary. It's just who I am. Marine veteran, former cop, sheepdog, whatever you want to call it. But while I was walking between Ben Hakim train station and the Eiffel Tower, I spotted what I assumed was a migrant angrily confronting 2 American tourists on the sidewalk. Upon listening to what was happening, I discovered the tourists were taking non-commercial photographs of one of the buildings on the streets, and accidentally got what I assume was an African migrant in one of the photos. The migrant proceeded to get right in their face and basically demand the male tourist delete his photographs, blocking their path to freely walk down the sidewalk. When I arrived and saw what was going on, I told the tourist straight up that they were not this guy's prisoner and that they were free to walk away and keep their photos. The migrant proceeded to tell the couple he would call the police, and I immediately called his bluff and demanded he do so. I told the couple that they did not have to delete their photos and that I would stand with them no matter what this migrant decided to do from here. They told me they appreciated, but they would comply with this bully and started to delete the photos on their camera. They were obviously both scared and intimidated by this thug, and I kept assuring them that I would not leave them, and that they could leave anytime they wanted and keep their photos, and that I had their back, even if it came down to some kind of use of force with this migrant. After they deleted their photos to the satisfaction of this migrant, he finally stepped aside and let the tourists continue on their way. I told the couple I would walk with them for a bit, but before I did, I turned around and faced the migrant who was walking away and loudly told him that I had been recording the entire time, and I had been. I then asked the guy if he was going to make me delete my photos, and he could try if he wanted. The migrant gave me a dirty look, but otherwise kept walking away. Folks, I do not tolerate bullies. I won't. I won't tolerate bullies intimidating me. I won't tolerate bullies scaring people in front of me. I get angry just watching YouTube videos of bullies on TV. Thankfully, I have yet to get into any kind of actual physical confrontation due to my aggressive stance, though I don't doubt it's coming one day. But I just won't tolerate it. Even in France, on a tight schedule, in the rain with an unknown migrant, in a land where I don't even pretend to understand the laws. Unfortunately, I only start to record halfway through the incident, but I have the second half of this confrontation on my YouTube channel, and it will be on the podcast website as always if you want to watch the replay of this incident. OneDayInSoCal.com. OneDayInSoCal.com. Now, you might be asking yourself why the migrant was so aggressive when tourists accidentally took his photo. Is it part of his African culture not to take someone's photo without permission? Is it a religious thing? Maybe he thinks part of his soul is taken away in the snapshot of a photograph? All incorrect. The most likely answer, and I don't have any proof of this, of course, is that this migrant, like many on the street of both London and Paris, are out pickpocketing tourists or committing some other kind of minor crimes and wanted to minimize the evidence against him to the extent possible. This happens all the time when people record pickpockets in public or even scams, such as the 3 cups and a ball scam, whatever it's called. The consensus is that there is a lot of pickpocketing that occurs in Paris, especially in the tourist zones. It does occur in London as well, but the prevailing wisdom from travel experts is that pickpocketing in Paris is out of control and the police do little to anything about it, for whatever reason. So, when coming to London or Paris, there are a few things I did to protect myself from these guys. As a former cop, I could spot these guys a mile away. As a former corrections officer, my head is always on a swivel and my back is always to the wall to the extent possible. But to the untrained tourist, it's easy to fall prey to these guys. So here's a few things I suggest. Get a specific backpack. If you are carrying around your passports or other important travel documents, some now have a secret hidden pouch that sits right on the padding on your back. It's very difficult to take anything from this area. Along with this backpack, get a small lock and lock up part or all of your backpack. I have a GoPro backpack, which I love in general, but the issue is it literally says GoPro in huge letters on the back, allowing everyone and their mom to obviously guess what kind of overpriced equipment is inside. However, despite that fact, it's actually fantastic because of the secret pocket I outlined earlier on the backpack padding, and because when zipped up, all the zipper loops are close enough to each other that I can attach a lock to keep everything safe. When on subway trains or in line, try to keep your back to the wall and never turn away from someone. I know this is sometimes impossible, but when feasible, do this as much as possible. This is something I will always do, not just on vacation, but something I did working corrections in a previous career. Keep in mind, most of these low-life thieves work in teams. They may create some kind of distraction, and while everyone is distracted, another person sneaks up behind you or someone else and takes your items. If you catch someone stealing, raise hell. Claim you're going to call the police. Ask others for help if you are alone and scared. Make noise. These thieves are, for the vast majority, not looking for a confrontation. Many are migrants and don't want to risk deportation or other issues. All right. A couple tips there, but after dealing with the migrant, I continued my walk along the river, Seine, and arrived at the granddaddy of all Paris locations. And you guys already know what that is, the Eiffel Tower. It was unfortunately raining harder than ever at this point. I know I keep saying that, but it just keeps coming and it keeps dumping even more. And yeah, guys, I'm from Los Angeles, so hard rain out here is probably nothing like it is in Europe or even on the East Coast. Even when we had that so-called hurricane that came through, it was, pretty much light, occasionally moderate rain all day long. Like nothing like the rest of the world gets. So when I arrived at the Eiffel Tower, only the lower half of the tower was actually visible, with the upper half disappearing into the clouds. Long gone are the days, unfortunately, where you could just walk up and around the Eiffel Tower. Now there are barriers and glass gates that keep non-ticket holders out. A security measure, no doubt, but one that is unfortunate, as walking under and around the Eiffel Tower used to be a free tourist thing to do. But after going through a security checkpoint, you'll check in and receive your tickets. There are multiple lines going to a select few elevators that will whisk you away to the first floor. If you are fortunate enough to have basically a restaurant reservation, like me, you'll receive priority access to the elevator. The lines are certainly long, so pack your patience. But in any case, spend some time to walk underneath the Eiffel Tower, and you'll be rewarded with an amazingly beautiful sight as 7,000 metric tons of iron sits above you in a well-organized artistic structure. The tower is 1,083 feet high, which is absolutely incredible when you remember that this was built in 1889. There are 3 floors to the Eiffel Tower: first, second, and top level. The first floor is a flat platform at 187 feet above the ground. There is 14,485 feet of explorable space here. The second floor sits at 377 feet above the ground and has 2 platforms to explore at this level. There is 4,692 feet of explorable space here. The third and top floor is 906 feet with 802 square feet of explorable space. Unlike today's deficit tripling freeway projects, which take a decade to complete, the Eiffel Tower was built in just 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days. There is more inside the tower than just a viewing platform, though. There are restaurants, stores, museums, elevators, and restrooms, of course. The 2 main restaurants inside the Eiffel Tower are Madame Bragerie and Jules Verne Restaurant. Madame Bragerie is on the first floor, and Jules Verne offers a higher view at 410 feet up. For this trip, I went to Madame Bragerie and took the elevator up to the first floor. Keep in mind, there is a staircase, and it's a cheaper entrance ticket than the elevator. So if you are up for one hell of a hike while on vacation, or just back from your hike to Half Dome in Yosemite looking for your next challenge, step right up. For me, though, having walked all around Paris as well as London over the past week with much more walking to do, I decided to save a little energy. The main double-decker elevator will take you to the first and second floor, and it's from here that you'll have an option to travel to the very top of the Eiffel Tower on a high-speed central elevator, if you are able to reserve and buy tickets to the top floor. There are different kinds of tickets, and they do fill up fast. So literally, the moment tickets open up for the Eiffel Tower or any attraction, you should be, whether that's at midnight or 3 a.m., you should be up and buying those tickets immediately. I made this mistake of waiting for the tickets to open up, but a couple hours later, and I almost missed out on the opportunity to go to the Eiffel Tower because of it. And I don't know what it is about European tickets, but like here in the United States, you can often buy tickets like a year in advance to stuff. In Europe, that's not the case. If you're going to go someplace or visit a museum or an attraction or a tourist destination or historical monument, that requires tickets, you're going to have to reserve, but they shorten the window to sometimes as short as a couple of weeks. I think the Eiffel Tower was either a week and a half, about a month, or it was somewhere around there. It was about a month, about 4 weeks they opened up. And I don't know if that's just because they want to give everybody a fair chance and not just book it up a year in advance, which kind of makes sense, right? But at the moment that ticket opens up, everybody's online trying to snatch it. So just be warned. If you got a trip coming up or you're planning a trip, be there immediately. Because of the fact that I was a little late, I kept refreshing, and I did find one ticket with one time slot to the very top of the tower. But I had to buy a glass of champagne with it. There's, like I said, there's multiple tiers of tickets. There's the one where you just take the stairs all the way up. There's one where you have a restaurant, restaurant reservation. That gets you to the first, second floor. But the tickets to the very top of the Eiffel Tower are sometimes hard to get. So In my case, there was one ticket left, and it was a ticket to the very top at a certain time, but I had to buy a glass of champagne with it, which was much more than just the regular ticket. So I bought the glass of champagne and didn't drink it. So, because it was that important to me to go to the top of the Eiffel Tower. Just be warned about that. Anyways, back on track. The elevators are another incredible work of engineering that you can witness from your near 360 double-decker glass elevator window. The contract to design these very unique elevators was given to none other than the Otis Elevator Company. Each of the two superimposed compartments was originally designed to hold 25 passengers for a total of 50, with the operator riding on an exterior platform outside. And the motive power was provided by an inclined hydraulic ram. Today, elevator operators no longer sit outside and operate the lift. They are inside the compartment with you, probably for safety. But they do have a mannequin out there, kind of pretending like he's still operating the lift from the outside like they used to. That must have been kind of fun going up and down doing that. But once you arrive on the first floor, you will already be in utter amazement of the views around you. But your adventure here is just getting started. On top of the Madame Bragerie restaurant, gift shop, bistro, and small museum, there is a translucent glass flooring where you can look down on all the people well below you in the central esplanade below the tower. Madame Bragerie is the restaurant I dined at on this adventure and serves up Bragerie cuisine in a modern decor. Bragerie, by the way, is an informal French cafe with simple, hearty food. But make no mistake, this is a full-service, fine restaurant. What would normally require a suit and tie dress code is relaxed during lunch due to the nature of having Eiffel Tower tourists as their main customer. But don't visit with sportswear, jogging uniforms, running shoes, or flip-flops. Keep those Crocs at home. Having this in mind, I dressed in a polo shirt and pants with my regular Skechers walking shoes, and this was more acceptable for dining. Keep in mind, formal attire is required for dinner, a small price to pay for dinner with a view of the City of Lights at night. There is also a stairway that connects the first floor to the second floor, and I elected to make the walk to the second floor, which took about 20 minutes or so of climbing. By the way, I can't even remember. I remember the food, but I can't remember how to spell it or even pronounce it in French or even the names of it hardly. So I remember what it looked like, but I'll have some pictures of the food that I ate on the website onedayinsocal.com. But I don't know how to, it was French food. I just kind of was picking at random and just trying it out. And, I will say it was excellent. Absolutely amazing. Well worth it. Just a little small side note here. When I go on a cruise, one of my favorite, or any fine restaurant, one of my favorite things is just the house bread and butter. Just trying different bread. I don't know why. I just like bread. And somehow in France, they it's not like going to the grocery store or even your farmer's market or your baker. I don't know how they do it, but somehow they've absolutely perfected bread in France. They really have. The baguettes are just so good, so fresh, so tasty, so unique. Like you could just eat that as a meal on its own and be satisfied. They really are good, and I don't know how they do it or what secret is in there, but just the baguettes. If you just go down to a baker, walking around Paris, just grab a baguette and just take a couple bites of this thing, and you'll see what I mean. I don't know what it is, but it's not like going over to Ralph's or Vaughn's or you name the grocery store in your area and buying a baguette loaf of bread. It is not the same at all. But yeah, I'll have some of the pictures of the food that I ate on the website onedayinsocal.com on the photo section, just because I don't know what I ate. Some of you may be able to look at those pictures and see, and you'll be able to figure it out. But I remember what it looked like. I just don't know what it was. I just know it was excellent and great. So I'll have those there. But anyways, as I mentioned, there's a stairway that connects the first floor to the second floor, and I elected to take the walk to the second floor, which took about 20 to 25 minutes or so of climbing. I definitely needed a few breaks in between flights of stairs and was rewarded with views and the elevator coming up and down between the first and second floor. The second floor features an additional gift shop, a generous amount of platform to explore, and view from Paris on all four sides, and of course the elevators to the very top. Funny fact, the gift shops here get more expensive the higher you go, so unless you absolutely need to brag that you bought an Eiffel Tower trinket at the top, just don't. There is a coin press machine at the very top though, and I did grab an Eiffel Tower coin, one of the very few souvenirs I actually did buy for myself on this trip. Once I caught my breath, I made my way to the central elevators. Unlike the elevators to the first and second floor, which operate on the legs of the tower, the central elevators whisk you up the central point of the tower at high speeds, and they're traditional cable-pulled elevators. At the top, you'll enter an enclosed cabin with 360 views. For those that brave the heights, or that want to brave the heights, I should say, step outside one more story up and view Paris from nearly 1,000 feet all around. It's here you'll be able to order or collect your glass of champagne and view Gustave Eiffel's original office through glass, just the way he left it. The clouds finally started giving away to the sun, and nonstop rain finally gave me a little break. And what I witnessed from the top of the Eiffel Tower was just pure magic of the highest order. It goes well without saying that the Eiffel Tower is something you cannot miss if visiting Paris. Literally, if you only have time for one thing, this is it. It's undoubtedly even better at night when Paris is spread before you and the Eiffel Tower is lit up as well, including periodic sparkles and twinkles and its iconic lighthouse-style light on top. But after the Eiffel Tower, I spent some time walking along the Seine River. I actually had a Seine River cruise scheduled, but I ended up deciding to skip it. I still had some shopping to do, and my time in Paris was beginning to come to a close. So along the way, I stopped by the famous Passerelle de Billy Bridge. The bridge has an estimated 700,000 to 1 million love locks attached to it. That is, couples express eternal love by hanging locks with their initials on the bridge. Again, I'm probably butchering the French words here, so I do apologize in advance. But speaking of French words, I finished up my time in Paris by taking a walk down Rue Saint-Jacques. It's the bustling road that runs just southwest of Notre Dame. Along the way, I stumbled upon the Church of Saint Severin, a beautiful 12th century church named after Saint Severin of Paris, who was a devout hermit who lived on the site in the 6th century, dying around 540 AD. The original chapel was destroyed during the Norman invasions of the 9th century, and the present church was built on the site. I bring this church up because this is truly one of my favorite things to do when I travel, letting exploration bring the adventure to me. I was delighted by the fact that the doors were open and I could explore at my leisure. It's still an active building in the Catholic Church, built in the flamboyant Gothic style. The interior features vaulted ceilings, and like any building this old, there is so much detail, from sculptures and twisted columns, ironwork on doors to stained glass windows, rows and rows of stained glass windows, portraits of saints, biblical people, or events. The oldest stained glass window here actually dates back to 1378. Imagine that. A stained glass window surviving over 644 years through war, natural disaster, and the endless rot of time. Just walking through these hollowed halls, you can feel the heaviness of time and the past events weigh down on you, almost as if it wants to speak to you but has stopped just short from doing so. Despite everything I did in Paris, for some reason, this had the most lasting impression on me. And I loved it all the more because I stumbled upon it by complete accident. That's what you're going to get when you explore places like London and Paris. There is so much fantastic history here that you are going to turn the corner and come upon an ancient relic that meant so much, perhaps everything, to your ancestors. Shopping in Paris, though, is tough. After leaving the church, I went out to do some shopping for some souvenirs for friends. And it's tough because if you don't speak French, you're going to have a language barrier for sure. And it's real, and French is commonly agreed upon to be one of the harder languages to learn. Another tool in my travel belt is Google Translate. Using Google Translate, I was able to have conversations in real time with people, including shopkeepers that could fully understand me and help me. I could let them talk, then have the app translate to English and vice versa. Or I could type a message and have it read in French. I could even take photos of things that were in French and have them immediately translated to English. You know, it was an invaluable tool when I went shopping for souvenirs to bring back. Google's not a sponsor here, but as always, I just want to give you folks the best info and my experience. Anyways, my time in Paris was unfortunately coming to an end. I made my way to the nearest metro station that would take me back to Gare du Nord, but certainly spent some time stopping along the way to admire the one and only Notre Dame Cathedral. While I was visiting, Notre Dame was still undergoing extensive refurbishment after that crippling fire that occurred in 2019, to the horror of the world. With a last look at Notre Dame, I descended into the city metro station and made my way back in time for my return to London. The ride back was uneventful. Again, I traveled in standard Premier and enjoyed a welcoming dinner with lunch at Madame Bragerie, burnt off well by this time. Arriving back in London at approximately 9:30 p.m., my walk back to the hotel was eerie in the mist as I navigated back alleys, waiting for Jack the Ripper to pop out at any moment. My trip was fulfilled. The last day of a trip, especially one that could easily fit into the once-in-a-lifetime category as this one, is always a very somber one, isn't it? You've had the best trip money could buy, seen things most people around the world will only dream of seeing, and if you're an adventurer like me, fulfilled one of many lifelong dreams, and one of adventure at that. Yet, your week-long adventure has only made you hungry for more. In the deepest part of your mind, you wonder, what if I didn't get back on that plane and just stayed another day, a week, a year? Then reality hits you and you know you have to go. You have to part with your friend. That last English breakfast, that last ride on the underground to Paddington Station, the last few looks around as they enter the Heathrow Express and those doors close on you, taking away your freedom to get back into London and explore further. Still, in the end, you know your trip has been worth it and has enriched you as a human, has brought you the knowledge of a different way of life and thinking, a different outlook, and the stories you've read about in history books, seen in documentaries, or even a Disney film. The wonder all before you. Because I would be flying steerage on the way back, well, economy, but you know, the same thing. I couldn't bring back as many souvenirs as my weight limit was once again reduced to 50 pounds. Fortunately, I just made it by 1 pound. That, of course, meant that only the most important people in my life got a souvenir. If you got one, you made the cut. If you didn't, sorry. After going through UK's version of TSA, I headed straight to the United Lounge. United's Heathrow Lounge is truly one of the best and largest lounges. There is so much room to stretch out. The decorations are amazing. Fantastic floor-to-ceiling windows for a view of the airport activities. Lots of open space as well as private nooks and crannies, showers. Best of all, the food offerings here are almost like a mini buffet. You still aren't going to make your money back by giving United $60 or more to access the lounge, but you are going to get some good food and a quiet place to relax for your long journey back to Denver. Food here included spaghetti, sandwiches, plenty of desserts, the usual soda, tea, juice, coffee, baked potatoes, charcuterie board items, mashed potatoes and gravy, beans, and more that I've already forgotten. But soon enough, you're on your way back to Denver. And one last thing I want to note about Denver. If you don't like turbulence, then I'd also suggest flying a 787-9 to Denver during an active tornado warning at the airport. But I did. And that was one bumpy ride, let me tell you. Even for a fantastic aircraft like a 787. The pods, they obviously reviewed everything, and they said we could do it, and they did it. And I'm not going to say it wasn't a heck of a bumpy ride. This is why I get window seats, by the way. I want to look out. I want to know what's going on. If the plane's rocking and rolling, you know, turbulence doesn't scare me like it used to, but if this plane is bouncing around, I want to look out the window and see why. And even if there's nothing I can do about it, because I'm strapped to a seat in the back somewhere. But, you know, I had people looking at me like, oh my gosh, what's going on out there? And it was definitely bouncy and a bumpy ride. But we made it back. We landed. And unfortunately, my flight back to Las Vegas from Denver was delayed extensively due to the hurricane warning. Or the tornado warning. Yeah, that'd be even worse. But eventually I did make my way back, and that's really about it for the trip, guys.